When does a war truly end? That's the question at the center of today's episode. Does it end when victory is declared, or does it end when the loser formally surrenders? Does it end when the soldiers are sent home, or at least many, if not most of the soldiers, the ones who aren't needed for the occupation and rebuilding of the losing side? Does it end when the losing country has been readmitted to the UN, or another international governing body? When it's been given the same rights as every other nation, and the international community is positive that there is no fascist dictator 2.0 coming to send the country back into totalitarianism? Or does it end when all of the fighting ends, when every last soldier has laid down their arms? If that last answer is true, then I guess World War II was still going strong in the mid-1970s. While the overwhelming majority of soldiers who served in both sides of the conflict either unfortunately died in action, returned home, or were declared missing, perhaps they died, perhaps they went off to live new lives somewhere else, a very small number of them decided to keep fighting, past the official end date of September 2nd, 1945. And almost all of them were Japanese. After Japan officially surrendered at the end of World War II, numerous Japanese holdouts in Southeast Asia and the Pacific Islands that had been part of the Japanese Empire continued to fight local police, government forces, local villagers, and allied troops unwilling to accept the idea that the great empire they called home could possibly lose. Many of them were captured in the next few years, killed themselves, or finally defected, i.e. gave up and ultimately returned home. But there were some soldiers who simply could not be captured, who refused to surrender, who refused to accept that Japan had lost and the war was over. Their training went too deep. They had too much honor. They refused to defy their orders, to never surrender or take their own lives. They were excellent soldiers, excellent to a fault. One of these men was Hiroo Onoda. In the final months of World War II, Onoda was stationed on Lubang, a tiny island in the Philippines. At the Futamata branch of the Nakano Military School, his training had defied the widely distributed Senjinkan battlefield code instructions, which forbade Japanese combatants from being taken prisoner and instructed them to die fighting or via self-sacrifice instead. But Onoda was told to fight no matter what. His mission was to destroy the Lubang airfield and appear by the harbor, plus any enemy planes or crews who attempted to land. And that was a mission he would try to accomplish for 3 decades. With a few other holdouts, Onoda remained hidden in the jungle amongst stinging ants and snakes like the highly venomous Philippine-spitting cobra, living on a diet of mostly bananas, coconuts, stolen beef, and stolen rice. Convinced that the continual leaflets being dropped by the Japanese government informing them that the war was over was actually nothing more than Allied propaganda. He was going to complete his mission, even if he was the last Japanese soldier left on Lubang. And eventually, he was the last soldier. And he still kept fighting. Never surrender. The super strange story of Hiro Onoda, right now on this biographical, historical, World War II did not end for everyone in 1945 edition of Timesuck.
This is Michael McDonald, and you're listening to Timesuck.
You're listening to Timesuck.
Well, happy Monday and welcome to the Cult of the Curious. I am Dan Cummins, the suck master, possible lunatic, guy who tries really hard to pay attention to alarm balls. And you are listening to Timesuck. Hail Nimrod, hail Lucifina, praise be to good boy Bojangles, and glory be to Triple M. Stick around today for our updates. I got a good one regarding the Cult of the Curious 3 out of 5 stars private Facebook group. And now who else needs an escape today? Who else wants to get lost in a story? Yeah, me too. So let's head towards a topic that brings us back to a subject we've covered many times on Timesuck in some shape or form, World War II. Today, however, we will not be taking a big picture look at the battles and campaigns, since Hiro's life was so fascinating and ultimately didn't really have that much to do with what was actually going on in the war and what happened afterwards. Since time pretty much stopped for him in 1944, at the end of 1944, beginning of 1945, dude was literally a living time capsule. We won't be looking at the war in the Pacific either. If you'd like a refresher on that episode, you can head on over to episode 323. In that episode, we covered how Imperial Japan had a ferocious fighting force, how they despised their enemies, possibly even more than the Nazis did, and how they really did like a lot of raping. Like, I can't see how they weren't the rapiest soldiers of the modern era or maybe even of all time. Amount of raping. Wish I was kidding about that. We covered how their empire was sustained by soldiers who believed in the most extreme version of militarism, that it should dominate the political and social life of the nation. Most Japanese citizens of the day were contemptuous of the softness of the U.S. and European democracies, where loyalty and patriotism were tempered by silly woke shit like the rights and well-being of individuals. Pfft, get out of here. Stop bitching about what you want personally. Just dedicate yourself to only doing what's best for your nation until you're dead, maggot. Sacrifice. Help the rich get richer. Help Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg get more mega yachts. That's what being a good citizen in the United States of corporate America is all about. Sorry, I got sidetracked. Refocusing. Most Japanese citizens of the 1940s were contemptuous of the softness of the U.S. and European democracy. They really were. And that mentality of thinking that loyalty and patriotism are just the end-all, be-all of life can get you into some pretty strange places. Hiro Onoda might be the best example of this. I'm very excited for you to hear this. This is fucking insane. I wanted to do this episode for a long time, and it was everything I hoped for and more. Not much to go over for this one in terms of episode structure. It's pretty straightforward. We'll meet Hiro Onoda and see how he was sent down the path that led him to become the second to last firmly documented holdout of the Japanese military. And yeah, at least one other dude stayed in the jungle thinking the war was still on, even fucking longer than this guy. And a few other soldiers, they might have stayed out in the jungle a lot longer. But before we do that, let's go back to the question I posed up top. When is the war truly over? Perhaps because we live in such a media-driven culture, even more so than we did back in the 1940s with radio and newspapers, our image of a finished war might be something like the scenes of V-Day or the liberation of Auschwitz. People cheering in the streets, soldiers marching back to marching back to safety with rescued prisoners, spontaneous kisses, waving flags and banners. It all looks so good, so victorious, so complete. But there's a lot of shit left to do, even after the treaties are signed. One of the post-wartime issues, a big issue, is the deceptively straightforward question of how do you get everybody back home who fought? American soldiers were primarily transported back to the U.S. through a military operation called Operation Magic Carpet, which primarily utilized Navy ships like aircraft carriers to bring troops home from both the European and Pacific theaters. The first place soldiers came home from was Europe, since Germany had been defeated first. And to figure out exactly who got to come home first, a point system took into account various factors like how long somebody had served, how decorated they were, how close together their eyes were, which makes sense, right? If you had eyes, right next to each other, almost touching or maybe even barely touching, kind of like a cyclops, it was a lot harder for you to stay alive during the war since you had almost no peripheral vision and you could never tell who might be sneaking up on you. And it was harder for you to shoot people since your vision was always, a little blurry and you probably were usually seeing double and stuff. And that was just some silly goosery. They didn't take eye spacing into account as far as I know. But there were also other factors. Soldiers were awarded 12 points per dependent child, up to a maximum of 3 kids. No bonus points for kicking out a whole dozen for some reason. Initially, a total of 85 points was needed for eligibility. Soldiers who had earned that number of points were to be demobilized as soon as transport back to the U.S. was available. And then once all those dudes had been sent home, the rest were taken back to the States as well. Like lower and lower points were taken back. It was far from a perfect system. Some soldiers in designated specialties were declared ineligible for demobilization, despite having accumulated the 85 points. And officers were not initially included in the point system for demobilization. By the time Japan surrendered, the public pressure over rapid demobilization for soldiers and their families had increased greatly. A lot of people were real fucking annoyed that they still hadn't made it back home. Even though the war in Europe ended on May 8th, 1945, there were still a lot of soldiers stuck in Europe to start off 1946. The points required for demobilization were reduced several times, reaching 50 points on December 19th, 1945. 10 aircraft carriers, 26 cruisers, and 6 battleships were converted into troop ships to bring soldiers home from Europe and the Pacific. But racial segregation on these troop ships would slow shit down. For example, in December of 1945, the Navy barred 123 African-American soldiers from sailing home because they could, quote, not be segregated on a troop ship. Fucking irony of that. These guys have been drafted to fight a war mostly, when you really boil it down, against racism, since Nazis were motivated primarily by trying to take over the world and ethnically cleanse it, and the Japanese had their own racial motivations. And now they're stuck in Europe after the war has ended because of their own nation's racist policies. We truly are Such a fucking stupid species sometimes. Also complicating troop removal was the U.S. government trying to figure out how many soldiers they needed to leave behind in Europe and Asia to help nations recover from the war and make sure the Nazis and the Japanese didn't somehow rise back up with a new leader, try starting shit again. On January 4th, 1946, the War Department backtracked on its previous promises of early demobilization and announced that the remaining 1.55 million eligible servicemen will be demobilized. Can't wait to never have to say that word again. I don't like it. Would be demobilized and discharged over a 6-month period rather than the 3 months they had previously announced. And perhaps unsurprisingly, this announcement generated immediate protests from soldiers around the world. 4,000 soldiers in Manila, in the Philippines, would demonstrate against the cancellation of a repatriation ship on Christmas Day 1945. On January 6, 1946, 20,000 soldiers marched on Army headquarters in Manila to protest. The protest spread worldwide, involving tens of thousands of soldiers in Guam, Japan, France, Germany, Austria, India, Korea, the U.S., England, elsewhere, where roughly 500 disgruntled soldiers confronted Eleanor Roosevelt. That was in England. Although a few soldiers were arrested, most commanders took a tolerant approach to these demonstrations. In Washington, D.C., Army Chief of Staff and future President General Dwight D. Eisenhower ordered an investigation of the Manila demonstration and concluded that the main cause was acute homesickness and recommended that no mass disciplinary action be taken against these demonstrators. The military then sped up demobilization by liberalizing the point system, and Eisenhower banned further demonstrations and threatened court-martials for future participants. Military also took steps to make service abroad more appealing for those waiting to come home. Basic training for new soldiers also was shortened from 17 to 8 weeks to try and, replace the people who were being lost. The Army also offered free travel to families of servicemen to go visit them if the soldier agreed to remain overseas for 2 years. Occupation troops in Europe were offered a 17-day European tour, little vacation tour, for the nominal price of between $25 and $35. But all that wasn't enough to keep the number of soldiers they needed there. Rapid demobilization, in the view of military planners, left the U.S. military understaffed to accomplish its post-war responsibilities. In addition, the number of conscripts being drafted into the Army was smaller than those needed to replace demobilized soldiers. The rapid demobilization of the U.S. military after World War II, in the words of one scholar, reduced the Army to, quote, a state of near impotency, weakened the prestige of our national policy, and endangered the security of the nation. However, other scholars have pointed out that the U.S. military in Germany were still able to perform occupational duties, control the German population, and suppress local uprisings. Occupation of Japan was more straightforward than the occupation of Germany. It started with how Japan's soldiers were sent home. At the end of World War II, Japan's military was stretched across much of Asia and the Pacific, the largest battlefield of any war in human history, including remote places like New Guinea and the Solomon Islands, which had limited roads and telephone lines, not to mention the airfields and docks you would need to transport a large number of soldiers. Over 3.5 million soldiers were stationed outside of Japan at the war's end. That's a fucking crazy number. Japan's military had grown to roughly 6 million men by 1945. And Japan had the difficult task of bringing them home at the same time as they were dealing with the horrendous fallout of the atomic bombs that had just decimated Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Japan suffered between 2.6 million and 3.1 million total deaths during World War II, and so many of their cities, not just Hiroshima and Nagasaki, had been bombed, like severely bombed. In one night, for example, in March of 1945, 16 square miles of Tokyo was firebombed into fucking rubble. They had a lot of shit to deal with. Along with uniformed soldiers, there were also civilians, including colonial officials, merchants whose industries relied on the war effort, Japanese who had been living in places like Manchuria or Taiwan for a generation or two already, territories they had conquered leading up to World War II that the Japanese had just lost. Not only did a whole bunch of Japanese need to be repatriated, so did their colonial subjects. There was a huge, enormous mess to clean up. Many Koreans in particular were not only in Japan in large numbers, but also in China, Manchuria, and Taiwan. Hundreds of thousands of them had to be taken, or had been previously taken out of Korea and forced to work abroad, and now they needed to get back home. And with Japan in shambles, the Allies stepped in to repatriate these poor people, which wasn't merely an act of charity. Getting everyone in their, quote, rightful place, Koreans in Korea, Japanese in Japan, etc., would help ensure that Japan couldn't rebuild their overseas empire. The end of the war also meant that many of these post-colonial territories were struggling to feed their people, so repatriating all the Japanese nationals would help relieve various economic burdens these territories were dealing with. Finally, there were strong humanitarian concerns of what might happen to the Japanese abroad if they were left to the mercy of their former subjects who fucking hated them, partially because they were so fucking rapey. Getting all of them back to Japan could avoid mass slaughters. And thus there was a sense of urgency. Repatriation needed to be done quickly. From September of 1945 to the end of 1946, around 5 million Japanese who had been living or fighting abroad were returned home. The Allies used their own ships and whatever Japanese shipping was available. Liberty ships, the iconic cargo vessel on which U.S. wartime logistics relied on, were now carrying disarmed Japanese soldiers and civilians back home. Right, there's so much work to be done following a war, right? Which I hadn't really thought about before, not in this amount of detail. Another solution to the task of transportation was for the Allies to take the remnants of Japan's navy and merchant fleet and press them into service as people movers. For military vessels like cruisers and destroyers, the Allies sailed them to Japanese shipyards that were still operational and removed their weapons and then sent them off to transport repatriates. But the Allies' efforts to do all this were slammed with labor shortages as American GIs were trying to get home en masse. So, to cope with the demand of operating these vessels and also repatriating Japanese on land, the Allies relied heavily on the same Japanese sailors who used to be manning Japan's naval and merchant vessels. In places like the Philippines and Korea, the U.S. Army temporarily retained Japanese POWs and surrendered personnel for the task of handling repatriation, and also keeping basic infrastructure running until they could be turned over to the governments of former Japanese territories. Governments needed to be completely rebuilt. In many stages of repatriation, the Allies had a heavy managerial and planning role, but relied on what remaining pieces were left of Japan's colonial bureaucracy to make its day-to-day operation happen. With some U.S. Liberty ships, some were crewed entirely by Japanese sailors, who were responsible for sailing, maintaining, and repairing the ship on their own with light Allied supervision. This likely made the task of transportation easier on the repatriates, who could communicate with Japanese crews, since obviously they spoke the same language. As an aside, this close relationship between the remnants of the Imperial Japanese bureaucracy and the Allies in a managerial role is often cited as a reason why the Allied occupation of Japan, generally speaking, went a lot more smoothly than the occupation of Germany. Former Nazis, not quite as easy to work with. Gotta say, I'm not too shocked about that. Nevertheless, in some cases in Asia, there were simply too many people to find and return. In China, while the vast majority of Japanese had repatriated by the end of 1946, the U.S. estimated that by as late as 1949, there were still around 60,000 Japanese nationals stuck in Manchuria due to China's civil war that took place from 1945 to 1949. Repatriation of Japanese in Soviet-controlled areas ran into problems as well, thanks to the Soviet Union no longer being interested in playing nice with Allied powers as the Cold War began to ramp up. Also, some soldiers who had been living abroad had simply decided they didn't want to go home. They'd fallen in love with some woman overseas, started a family, hail Lucifina. They'd made lucrative business connections, or they just preferred wherever they ended up to, where they were from for just fucking whatever reason. Maybe they had better hot dogs or ice cream or something. This was common in French Indochina and Indonesia, where the Allied ships were much slower to arrive, which offered Japanese soldiers a longer opportunity to contemplate their situation and, consider alternatives. Also, some Japanese soldiers worried they would be arrested for war crimes if they stepped foot on a ship. And rumors were spreading that there was a famine in Japan, and their nation had no food to spare for any returning soldiers. Meanwhile, anti-colonial wars were heating up in both French Indochina and Indonesia. Both sides wanted the Japanese to participate. In Indochina, for instance, the Viet Minh, although they had hated the Japanese occupation, were short of weapons, munitions, and trained officers, and convincing Japanese soldiers to desert and join them promised access to all three. Meanwhile, the French and British were recruiting Japanese soldiers through Operation Masterdom to fight the Viet Minh. A similar situation arose in Indonesia, which had declared independence from the Netherlands in August of 1945. The Dutch had ordered the Japanese awaiting repatriation to join them and fight the Revolutionary Army, and some obeyed. Others joined the revolutionaries. As you can see, a lot of Japanese soldiers ended up fighting in different wars, or they found other things to do for months or even years before coming home. It was tricky, very, very difficult, to round everyone scattered across the thousands and thousands of miles of mainland Asia and men who had been stationed on literally hundreds of little islands all across the Pacific and get them all home, especially in the days before laptops and satellite Wi-Fi and smartphones and digital databases used to track everybody. So it makes sense Some soldiers would slip through the cracks. If a few guys were hiding out in some remote jungle, how would anyone back home know that they were alive? And not just a few more of the thousands and thousands of soldiers who had died in the jungle and hadn't been found. Today, almost 80 years after the end of the war, over 1 million Japanese soldiers are thought to have died in World War II, or who were thought to have died in World War II are actually officially listed as missing still, over 1 million. After a few years following the end of the war, locating missing troops, so many missing troops, and making sure, anyone who might be stuck abroad to get back home was just no longer a top priority for the Japanese, the U.S., or anybody else. There were more pressing concerns, like rebuilding so many different nations. And for the U.S., making sure those rebuilding efforts were led by us or our allies, not the Soviet Union, newly communist China, or any of their allies. Suffice to say, there was a whole lot of shit going on. And a couple people slipping through the cracks, not a priority. Which actually makes this story even crazier, because Hiro Onoda and his fellow soldiers, they didn't slip through the cracks. A lot of people were trying to get these guys to come home for a lot of years. For decades, they were the targets of relentless campaigns by the Japanese and Philippine governments who released flyers, dropped photos of their families, played personalized messages begging these soldiers to come out of hiding. They sent fucking family members to wander around in the jungle, literally calling out for them, hey, it's me, come home, and more. But these soldiers simply ignored all of that. You'd think they'd be within their rights to suspect a trick one time, even 2 or 3 times. But after decades, even when they had a transistor radio and were hearing about trade deals made between Japan and the U.S. in the post-war era, well, they thought that was a trick too. They thought damn near everything was a trick. The longer they stayed in the jungle, and holy shit were they in the jungle so long, their paranoia just deepened and deepened. Their wartime training had also gone too deep, heroes in particular. And to discover how he got that training, to discover how growing up in Imperial Japan could really fuck you up, and then getting specialized military training could fuck you up even more and turn you into more of a robot than a human, let's head into today's Timesuck timeline.
Strap on those boots, soldier. We're marching down a Timesuck timeline.
Hiro Onoda was born in the town of Kainan in the Wakayama Prefecture on March 19th, 1922. And I want to visit Japan so bad after looking at so many fucking videos this week to figure out how to say so many of these words. And I know I say that about so many places, but I do always mean it. There's just so much world to explore out there. And with Japan, part of the appeal for me is the Japanese language and accent. I love it. If I could learn one Asian language, I think it would definitely be Japanese. I truly love the way it sounds. I love watching TV shows, movies, where the dialogue is in Japanese. And I get to hear it while I read the subtitles to understand what the fuck's going on. The dudes, they just sound so manly. And the women sound so lovely. Random aside, I know. Not much is known about Hiro's early life. He was the 5th of 7 children, 5 boys and 2 girls. His oldest brother, Toshio, attended the preeminent first high school in Tokyo, went on to study medicine at the Tokyo Imperial University. He would go on to become a medical officer in the army, stationed near the border between Korea and Manchukuo. The next oldest son was Tadao, and then there was Chie, Hiro's older sister. There was a third son named Yoshi, but he died in childhood, and then Hiro was born. His little brother of 2 years was Shigeo, and the last was Keiko, born when Hiro was 7. By the time he was attending Kainan Middle School, he was crazy about Japanese fencing, a sport called kendo. Although he wasn't really good at school, he did like to go because after classes, he could then go to the kendo gym and practice with a bamboo sword until he was all worn out. His specialties were a jumping body attack and side attack to his opponent. His teacher, Izaburo Sasaki, was 6th rank at the time, a level of mastery called Rokudan. To achieve that, the practitioner had to train for at least 5 years and be at least 29 years old. What you had to do to achieve these ranks is pretty crazy. Achieving the 7th rank meant that you would become, quote, versed in justice, while the 8th required at least 31 years of training. and actually more than that, because it was 31 years of training after you reached the age of 13. And you had to be at least 46 years old. Man, kendo, all about commitment, discipline, patience, a never-ending quest to try and perfect its movements. Sasaki, still at the 6th rank, was a small man, but was reputed to be the most skillful kendo practitioner in all of the Wakayama Prefecture. Hiro looked up to him. He was the smallest boy in his class. He wanted to figure out ways to defend himself from older, bigger bullies. But there was one boy in his class that Hiro could never beat, a boy named Kaoru Kobiya, who would go on to attend Waseda University and become a 7th-rank kendo master. By the time they'd gotten to the 5th year of school, the last Hiro still had not beaten him once and asked Kaoru if they could spar so he could beat him just that one time. And Kaoru agreed to spar as many times as it took for that to happen. And then it only took one round. Hiro expertly dodged and lunged forward and to the right, changing his sword, or clanging his sword against Kaoru's breastplate. Afterward, Kaoru said offhandedly, "That was some thrust, Onoda." Sounded like a compliment, but for Hiro, it hit home. He'd done a good job technically, but he didn't sense in himself that he had fought for the right reasons, for honor and duty. No, he was fighting for ego. He was fighting for personal pride, which is actually against the spirit of kendo. And now he resolved to become more disciplined. That same year, 1939, Hiro graduated, went to work for a local trading company named Tachima Yoko, which specialized in lacquerware. Lacquerware, it's any objects decoratively covered, with lacquer. Hard and usually a shiny coating or finish made from resin extracted from trees and waxes since ancient times, since antiquity. Lacquerware, mostly like small containers, could be a large container. A lot of it's like tableware, a variety of small objects carried by people. And ancient lacquerware has been around in Japan for over 13,000 years. Hiro took the job knowing that he'd be eventually sent to their branch in Wuhan, China. It was a long way to go for a 17-year-old, but Hiro craved independence from his parents and thought that China would offer plenty of opportunities for him to work hard and make that motherfucking money. But really, he did hope to make a lot of money. And Wuhan was where his older brother, Tadao, was stationed as a first lieutenant in the army. He arrived in Wuhan in the middle of April of 1939, immediately went to see Tadao in the officers' quarters. Tadao was shocked to see him. What on earth was his little brother doing there? What a fun moment for those two. Hiro explained himself, and Tadao said that under no circumstances could he be responsible for looking after Hiro in China. China was a dangerous place for the Japanese. He might be killed. He wasn't wrong. In the early 20th century, Wuhan was China's major industrial powerhouse city, producing iron and steel, silk and cotton, tea packing, food canning, and more. Its output was essential to the coastal port cities, feeding them commodities like tea, meat, tobacco, etc., producing essential materials like iron, steel, silk, etc. In 1900, the American magazine Collier's published an article about the boom town of Wuhan, calling it the Chicago of China. 2 years before Hiro arrived, the city was seized by the Japanese as part of their endless quest for imperial might during this era. Back on July 7th, 1937, outside of Beijing, Japanese and Chinese troops had clashed, marking the beginning of the Second Sino-Japanese War, a war that has been called the Asian Holocaust due to the massive scale of atrocities committed by Japanese soldiers against Chinese citizens. According to a Library of Congress resource guide, quote, with half of China ruined, 20 million Chinese military and non-military dead, and 480,000 Japanese soldiers killed on Chinese soil, the 8-year conflict was one of the bloodiest in world history. Also, over 200,000 Chinese women and girls as young as 12 would be forced into prostitution, forced to endure rapes, beatings, murders at the hands of Japanese soldiers. It's not known how many Chinese women were raped by Japanese men, since there was so much shame in reporting rape back then. But I imagine the true number was probably in the millions, at least the hundreds of thousands. This unbelievably brutal conflict started when Japanese forces conducting military exercises near Beijing claimed that several Japanese soldiers participating in the exercise were not accounted for after the exercise. After the Japanese request to enter a nearby town to conduct a search for these soldiers was denied by the Chinese, the Japanese launched an all-out assault. Within a few days, what started as a local conflict had escalated to a full, though undeclared, war between China and Japan. Japan's imperial ambitions would lead it to invade China's great cities like Shanghai, Beijing, Nanjing, committing so many atrocities against the local population along the way. Most historians believe that the atrocities against Chinese civilians by the occupying Japanese forces, especially in Nanjing, where somewhere between 40,000 and 300,000 unarmed citizens were massacred, where between 20 and 80,000 women are estimated to have been raped over a period of only about 6 weeks, where systematic actions ordered by high-level officials in Tokyo to crush the Chinese will of continuing the resistance just kept occurring. Just shows how brutal this war was. By December, Japan had established the puppet nation of Mengjiang in the Inner Mongolia region of the Republic of China. A group of Chinese communists held out in their base in northwest China, And as the war went on for several years, it looked to many as if China would eventually surrender and accept peace on Japanese terms. But Japan didn't only want China. In 1938, Japan declared the New Order for East Asia. Japan announced that it would seek the permanent stability of East Asia, neighborly amity and international justice, a joint defense against communism, the creation of a new culture, economic cohesion and cooperation, an overall climate of peace. They'd barely rape most people more than probably 1 or 5 times, as long as Japan could be in charge of fucking everything. As a response, in July of 1939, the U.S. announced its withdrawal from a commercial treaty it had with Japan. 2 months later, in September, as World War II began in Europe, Japan announced its neutrality in the European situation. It was too busy fucking hammering the shit out of China. By February of 1940, the Japanese government announced a record-high budget, with over half its expenditures going directly to the military. They were continuing to build up their war machine and to use it to hammer other Asian nations. That September, the Japanese occupied Vietnam and established several bases in French Indochina. Local French administrators were now only figurehead authorities, puppets. All of this is going on as Hiro is getting acclimated to his new home. And that's why his brother warned him to be careful. Plenty of Chinese people in the area. Well, plenty of people all over in Asia fucking hated the Japanese and would have loved to see them dead. After meeting with his brother, Tadao agreed to buy Hiro a suit, and Hiro chose an expensive one. Pretty funny. One made from good English expensive woolen material. It was custom made by a tailor, much to Tadao's chagrin. Classic little brother move, taking advantage of big bro's generosity. Hiro would need the suit for his new job of keeping branch accounts. He would live in the company's 3rd floor dormitories. Offices were on the 2nd floor. Showroom was on the 1st. Pretty easy commute. All of that in a building on a busy downtown Wuhan street. After about a year of working in that office, he was made a buyer. Now he got to travel. He got sent around each day to nearby towns to visit suppliers. Because his boss was afraid people wouldn't respect Hiro because he was so young, he bought the 18-year-old a 1936 Studebaker. Gorgeous old car. Looks fucking gangster. Hiro loved it. He's kicking ass. He loved taking the car to the French concession, where he would dance almost every night. It was a fancy little dance hall. Cost a lot of money, but somehow Hiro had gotten his older brother Tadao to agree to pay for half of his living expenses. So he had the funds to party. Some of that money went to cigarettes, as Hiro smoked about 20 a day. Of course he did. It was the 1940s. Everybody fucking smoked. Doctors were being paid by big tobacco companies to tell their patients that smoking was harmless. It was good for you. It relaxed you. Hiro also played the popular Chinese tile-based game of mahjong, sometimes all throughout the night. Playing that led him to becoming pretty fluent in Chinese. January of 1941, Hiro's brother Tadao Onoda is sent to the Army Accounting School in Tokyo, and Hiro is left to fend for himself in Wuhan. In response, Hiro works harder and dances harder. He now knew he's probably run out of time to fuck around, have fun, make some good money. In only 2 years, he knew he'd be drafted into the Japanese army, and since he had grown 2 or 3 inches taller and had no ailments, he was pretty sure he'd be put into Class 1A. Class 1A was the classification for soldiers who were deemed, quote, fit for active service with no reservations, meant you were going to be fighting. If he was lucky, he thought back then, maybe the war would end before he needed to be drafted. He liked it in China. He liked the French dance hall, the pretty girls, his cool-ass car. He liked smoking cigarettes and playing mahjong until the wee hours of the morning. In the war, if the war would just end, right, he could keep rising up in the ranks through his company that he worked for, make more and more money, maybe make enough money to start up his own company in China, which was a dream of his. But of course, the war would not end. On August 1st, 1941, the U.S., under President Franklin D. Roosevelt, decided to push back against Japanese imperial ambitions. They imposed an oil embargo on Japan, cutting off some 80% of its supplies. This threatened to cripple both the Japanese economy and military strength once strategic reserves ran dry, unless alternative oil sources could be found. Japan considered this move an unspoken declaration of war. And unbeknownst to the U.S. military, they decided to strike back. Just before 8 o'clock in the morning, December 7th, 1941 local time, Japanese military aircraft attacked the U.S. Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. The attack left 18 U.S. naval ships sunk or damaged and over 300 planes destroyed. More devastating, the Japanese attack killed 2,403 and wounded another 1,178. It was a declaration of war, and the U.S. officially declared war back against Japan the next day, December 8th. Japan had just taken a huge risk, poked a big fucking bear. They knew that the industrial capacity of the U.S. meant that it could win a war through its sheer capacity to renew its supply of ships and armaments as well as recruitment of troops. But Japan felt that if they could act quickly enough and cripple the U.S.'s naval capacity in the Pacific, perhaps they could stop the U.S. from interfering with Japan's expansion into Southeast Asia, and that by the time the U.S. would get its shit together, then maybe it would be too late to fuck with mighty Japan. And so with that mindset, Japan went full speed ahead with their ambitious plans, for Asian domination. Within weeks, targets included Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaya, and the Dutch Indies, rich in oil, rubber, tin, and bauxite, places that fell to the Japanese. Meanwhile, Hiro's life was changing too. The dance hall, just about everything else, now had to close shop on the 8th day of each month as a contribution to the Asian war effort. The Japanese newspapers in Wuhan began to call anyone who frequented the French concession the vermin of Asia, and anyone who was in the concession late at night ran the risk of being picked up by the Japanese military police. Right? The time for fucking fun was over. Only war now. If you're drinking, you're trying to fuck, you're not keeping your mind sharp. You're not preparing to fight. Deprived of his greatest pleasures, Hiro now turned to another pastime, singing. He hired some of the boys in the band at the dance hall to give him singing lessons, and Hiro practiced mostly the blues and tangos, sometimes sitting up all night listening to records on an electric Victrola, which is fucking adorable. But this wouldn't last long. Hiro's time to leave was coming soon. In May of 1942, Hiro got called in for his Army physical, which he was dreading. He did pass it immediately, got that Class 1A, just like he feared, that designation. He was now required to report to the 61st Infantry Regiment in Wakayama, December 10th. Gone are his dreams of becoming a business mogul in China. He'll only be able to keep working for about 6 more months. Also that May, the Philippines, Hiro's future jungle home, is captured by Japanese forces. The Japanese had numerous naval victories in the South China Sea, Java Sea, and the Indian Ocean. In August of 1942, Hiro quit his job with Tajima Yoko and returned to Japan's Wakayama Prefecture. Once back home, he spent his days swimming in the nearby ocean, his evenings practicing kendo, his beloved kendo at the gym. It's a nice little life. He also wanted to be really in shape for when the time for war came. He promised his mother that he would come back a private first class, and 10 days after he was inducted in mid-December, he was assigned to the 218th Infantry Regiment along with new inductees from his area. And then before the year was over, they would ship out. Hiro had no idea where he was going to be sent, but soon that would be revealed. Nanchang, the capital of the province of Jiangxi back in China. Nanchang was the site of a series of major insurrections organized by the communists back in 1937. Eventually known as the Nanchang Uprising, the movement succeeded in holding the city for a few days, and a core group leading the movement would soon help form the People's Liberation Army. In 1939, after the Japanese captured Wuhan, they set their eyes on Nanchang since it was a major supply line between the 3rd and 9th war zones, as well as the location of numerous airfields. A battle began on March 20th, 1939, when the Japanese troops launched heavy artillery shelling. In addition to conventional artillery fire, the Japanese bombardment also utilized toxic gas produced by Unit 731, which had been deployed occasionally in the China field of operations. We did an episode on Unit 731 early on, way back in November of 2017, and man, those guys did this sick shit. The city fell on March 27th, with the Chinese defenders suffering heavy casualties. For Hiro, being sent to Nanchang was actually a lucky break. His older brother Tadao was there. Once again, he's following his bro to China. But Nanchang would also have its hardships. For one, it was fucking freezing. When he ate, Hiro's rice sometimes would literally freeze in the bowl. He was relieved to find out that he was assigned to a genial and good-spirited squad leader who had chosen Hiro personally because he thought he could make a good soldier. To prove him right, Hiro and his fellow ambitious cadets would march 3.5 miles an hour, occasionally even reaching speeds of 5 miles an hour, which is hauling ass for a group of dudes carrying heavy packs marching. Remembering his kendo training, Hiro never broke ranks. Physically, he was considered an excellent soldier, just tall enough at 5'4" to man most weaponry, but also small and svelte enough at 132 pounds to move discreetly. Small but strong, the pack he carried weighed over 60 pounds, around half his body weight. A pack he could carry, when he's marching up to 5 miles an hour. Soon, Hiro would face combat for the first time. It happened in a place called Anyi, between Nanchang and Chuchiang, where his squad was assigned to clean out a troop of enemy guerrillas. The battalion worked out a plan where the resistance leader would be captured alive. Unfortunately for Hiro, during the operation, he injures his right foot, and that prevents him from taking an examination for officers' training school. But his brother, Tadao, is able to intervene on his behalf, and on August 1st, Hiro is transferred to a preliminary officers' training unit. There, men are divided into 2 groups. Some go on to more advanced officers training while others remain non-coms. Fortunately, Hiro is in the first group. He'll get extra training from Lieutenant Tsunenori Ono, the regiment's standard bearer. Instead of going back to his company, he stays with the training unit, is given 2 weeks training, each in machine guns and horsemanship. After that, he has another week of drills and firing the regimental artillery. In the meantime, Tadao is transferred to a new division being formed down in Korea. When his initial officer's training is done, Hiro is assigned to a reserve officers training school in Kurume, a port in Kyushu, Japan, where he arrived January 3rd, 1944. The school was known as the Devil's Kurume because it was such a tough training camp. The officer in charge of Hiro's class, Captain Shigeo Tomi. Yeah, Captain Shigetomi. Oh my God, so many words to fight through this one, but it's a great story. It's worth it. This captain had a motto, better to sweat on the training ground than to bleed on the battleground. That's like a pretty good motto to me. He trained his 50 soldiers constantly in suicide attack maneuvers, shouting shit at them like, you're stupid, and you've got everything backwards when they fucked up, which was good for Hiro. He decided to try and become an officer pretty much on a whim because he wanted to impress his fellow soldiers and commander because the outfits look cool. But like his experience beating his rival in kendo in high school, he now learned what it really meant to be a soldier, like spiritually, how to truly conduct oneself with honor and humility in the Imperial Japanese Army. And he started to take his training very seriously. And because of his hard work, he was made into an officer. On March 5th, 1944, while Hiro was out on maneuvers, he got a message telling him to return to base to see a visitor. It was his brother, Tadao. I love how close these two are. He'd been attached for temporary duty to a division command in Korea, had been in Pyongyang for a while, but as of March 1st, he had been ordered to the 23rd Army headquarters in the Chinese province of Guangdong. He'd taken a plane from Hakata in a day or two. He will take one, but he had just enough time right now to come see his little brother. They talked for a while, and just as Tadao started to leave, he said, be strong, it won't be long before you're going to need all the strength you have. He could not have known how true those words really were. Hiro replied, don't worry, I'll die like a man. Well, Tadao said, there's no point in rushing off to get killed, but you'd better be prepared to die in case your turn comes. And then just before they got to the front gate, Tadao had something else to say to his little bro. He said, have you ever had a woman? Such a big bro thing to say. Hiro smiled mysteriously. Apparently, he had really had some fun, thanks to that French dance hall. And Tadao clapped him on the shoulder and told him to take care of himself. And then Hiro had one last request. Give me 50 yen to remember you by, he asked. Such a little bro move. And Tadao gave baby bro 100 yen. In August of 1944, Hiro finished officer training, became an apprentice officer or junior officer. He'd have to remain there for another 4 months before his commission as a second lieutenant became official. The usual procedure was for apprentice officers to go back to their former units, but the war situation in the Pacific was so serious by this time that half of the men who had come for training from China were going to be reassigned to units of the Western Army in Kyushu. But Hiro was not in that group, so he expected to be sent back to China. He was dreaming about delicious Chinese food that he had come to love when he got called to headquarters and was given the following message. You are hereby ordered to the 33rd Squadron in the Eastern Sector. Hiro had never heard of this 33rd Squadron in the Eastern Sector, but he was told he would be stationed at a place called Futamata, north of Hamamatsu, so he'd still be in Japan. Hiro had no idea what all this meant, but he assumed he was heading out on some kind of special mission, and he was right. After his graduation ceremony, August 13th, he's a second lieutenant. It is now off to Futamata, where he would arrive August 16th. Training, however, would not begin until September 1st, so he did have a 2-week leave that he was able to take. He used it to visit Tokyo, partially because he wanted to get a company officer's sword belt from his oldest brother, Toshio, who was a major now in the military, and it had been transferred to the Army Medical Administration in Tokyo. I do love how close he is with his brothers. At his brother's house, Hiro told Toshio about his upcoming mission and said he had no idea what it was, and his brother seemed startled. It's this, Toshio said. And then he stuck out the index and middle fingers of his right hand and made a motion like you were pouring water into a teapot. Hiro assumed he was being secretive because his wife was nearby. What he managed to puzzle out later was a karate thrust into an opponent's eye, I guess, that's what he said, the pointed fingers, and the teapot suggested giving somebody a dose of poison. At least that's what he thought this all meant. So now he wondered, was Hiro going to be a spy? He had heard rumors of so-called pacification squads, these units that infiltrated behind enemy lines and tried to break down defenses from within. Hiro was not able to get any more info from his brother about all this. The next day, Hiro went to pay his respects to the Imperial Palace, to Yasukuni Shrine, the Shinto Shrine, and then another Shinto Shrine, the Meiji Shrine, and proceeded to Wakayama to see the rest of his family. Then on September 1st, time to report for his new mission. He shows up at the Futama branch of the Nakano Military School, unsure what to expect. The building was no more than a small collection of decrepit army barracks located a little more than a mile away from the train station. At the opening ceremony, the commander, Lieutenant Colonel Mamoru Kumagawa, addressed a class of 230 officers saying, "The purpose of this branch school is to train you in secret warfare. For that reason, the real name of the school is to be kept absolutely secret. Furthermore, you yourselves are to discard any ideas you may have had of achieving military honors." So he was essentially being trained to become an agent of the Japanese version of the CIA. And Japan had been doing this in secret for a long time. Prior to 1894, when the first Sino-Japanese War began, Japanese operatives posing as businessmen and as Buddhist missionaries in China and Russia had established detailed intelligence networks for the production of maps, recruiting of local support, and the gathering of information on opposing forces. Japanese spies would often seek to be recruited as personal servants to foreign officers or as ordinary laborers to be used on construction projects on foreign military projects or construction groups on foreign military projects. In July of 1938, after a number of attempts to penetrate the military of the Soviet Union had failed, Army leadership felt that a more systematic approach to the training of intelligence operatives was required. Lieutenant Colonel Shun Akijosa was instructed to organize a curriculum of a special training school to be located in Nagano, Tokyo. Thus, the Nagano School was born, and now Hiro was one of its students. Then Lieutenant Sawayama, one of the instructors, started asking rapid-fire questions. What did they think of Futomata? If the troops were stationed here, how many battalions would there be? What was the principal industry? How much food could the town provide for troops? And none of them had any idea. They'd just gotten there. And that, he said, was what was meant by intelligence. They would need to gather this kind of information about the areas they would be, sent to. And soon classes would begin. They would cover military forms, procedures, but their instructors emphasized that if they needed to, they could break the rules. Through 4 hours of training in the morning, 4 hours of training in the evening, the officers were packed into tiny classrooms where they learned everything there was to know about secret warfare, how to confuse, frighten, and surprise an enemy by any means necessary. They were encouraged to think for themselves, to make decisions where no rules existed, even conduct that would be considered disgraceful, like abandoning a besieged platoon, was considered good in secret warfare because it meant that you would stay alive another day to keep fighting the enemy. Also, it was okay to be taken prisoner because you could then give the enemy false information, which went against normal Japanese wartime tradition. Indeed, they were taught that there might be times when it was best to try and get captured. And again, far cry. All this stuff is a far cry from the mainstream Japanese idea of death before dishonor. In the conventional military, anyone who escaped a prison camp and returned to Japan would be court-martialed for cowardice, as well as socially ostracized. But not here. In October of 1944, American forces landed on Leyte, an island in the Philippines, and the overall situation became so grim that for the first time, Japan now had to consider the possibility of a mainland U.S. invasion. On November 30th, the class received orders to withdraw from the school. Then they were given word that 43 of these trainees, would be sent to the Philippines for secret, disruptive guerrilla warfare maneuvers. And that number included Hiro. He had no illusions about what he was being sent out to do. He believed that he would probably be sent off to an island to fight and die in secret, and his parents would never get to see their son receive recognition or honors. And that didn't bother him. At this point, he was all in with the Japanese military. He just wanted to bring honor, even if it was in secret, to Imperial Japan. His ego is gone. He just wanted to be useful to his country, even if it meant dying in secret. Gone was the young playboy who wanted to drink and dance, wear fancy suits, drive a cool car, make big money in business. No, he had been replaced by a very serious soldier, one who placed little value on his own hopes and desires, and instead thought of the bigger picture. What did his nation need from him? Before heading out, Hiro was sent back home to Wakayama for the first time in 3 months, where he asked his mom for a dagger that had been handed down from his great-grandmother. His mother said gravely as she gave it to him, "If you are taken captive, use this to kill yourself." That's some fucking crazy shit to hear from your mom. Even mom, all in when it came to the Japanese warrior sentiment of death before dishonor. That's fucking hardcore. And it was the norm, right? That was just the Japanese way at the time. Hiro agreed, but he knew he wouldn't do that because he had been instructed not to. He also wanted to take something to remember his father by and settle on a bamboo incense tube. Later, his two brothers would tell him that when their mom said he had taken the dagger and incense, they thought he was going to commit ritual suicide rather than go to war. That obviously was not the case. Hiro just thought the incense might be comforting someday. He gave one last message to his mom before he left. He left her a note, and in it he wrote, "My work being what it is possible that I may be reported dead when I am not. If you are told I have been killed, do not think too much about it, because I may well show up again after a few years." And with that, he's off. He and 21 officers, 21 fellow officers, had received orders to proceed to the Utsunomiya airfield, 60 miles or so north of Tokyo, and board a transport plane. But then once they got there, they discovered the plane had to be repaired. He had to spend a few days at a local inn. During that time, he and his fellow officers received news that American forces had landed at San Jose on the island of Mindoro in the Philippines, the nation's 7th largest, 8th most populous island. This is not good. They would leave Utsunomiya airfield on 3 airplanes, a number 97 converted heavy bomber transport, and 2 number 100 heavy bombers. And that was on December 17th. But because of delays, they would not make it to Clark Air Force Base, a base that had previously belonged to America and would soon belong to the U.S. again, in Luzon, the largest and most populous island in the Philippines, until December 22nd. When they landed, an air raid warning was in effect, but Hiro was surprised to see maintenance crews walking around as though nothing was happening. Apparently, they knew that the bombs would be heading to Manila that day. Clark was tomorrow. They'd been told that they had to make contact with the Special Intelligence Squadron of the 14th Area Army. They were contacted by 2 officers who had been sent from the squadron to wait for them. They then went back to Manila to report that the unit had arrived and came back the next day. Finally, on the 24th, a Hero squad departs. That same day, a low-flying U.S. B-24 Liberator bomber dropped Christmas cards on the city, addressed to the Philippine people, saying, "We are now in the South Pacific, hoping to ring in a Happy New Year with you." Yep, the Americans are close. The Americans are launching a massive assault on the area. Hiro and the other officers will be first tasked with trying to repel this assault. Big task. The local Special Intelligence Squadron is headquartered in what had been a foreign residential building in Manila. It's a 2-story concrete building with a sign over the entrance that said Institute of Natural Science. There, Hiro and his fellow officers are greeted by the squadron commander, Major Yoshimi Taniguchi. The major informed Hiro that he, along with 5 others, will be stationed with the Sugi Brigade, as the 8th Division from Hirosaki is known. The Sugi Brigade was in charge of defending the west central part of Luzon. Its headquarters were in Lipa. On December 26, 1944, in the middle of the night, the 6 officers destined for the Sugi Brigade left Manila in a truck with Major Taniguchi and a bunch of ammunition. They arrived at division headquarters in Lipa just before dawn. The headquarters were simple, just round huts, like the ones the locals lived in. Be funny if they lived on them. It was very simple headquarters. It was a lot like the round huts that locals would live on top of. You know how it is in the Philippines. They build a nice house and then they live on the roof and they're afraid to go inside. No, they had like little round huts with plain boarded walls, thatched with palm leaves. Inside one of these huts were a number of other officers: Lieutenant Colonel Motoyama of Strategic Command, Major Takahashi of Intelligence Command, Captain Yamaguchi of the Rear Squadron, First Lieutenant Kusano of the Intelligence Squadron, and a few others. And I'm pretty fucking pumped that I feel like I just nailed those names. 2 officers from Hiro's group, Shigeru Moriguchi and Shigechi Yamamoto, were called over in order to lead an attack on the city of San Jose with 50 troops. Next, Shin Furuta and Ichiro Tataku, were assigned to lead a guerrilla group on the island of Mindoro. Now it was Hiro's turn. Major Takahashi said, apprentice officer, see, I don't just fuck up Japanese words, I fuck them all up. Apprentice officer Onoda will proceed to Lubang Island, where he will lead the Lubang garrison in guerrilla warfare. It was the first time Hiro had ever heard of Lubang. Lubang is the largest amongst 7 islands in the Lubang group of islands, an archipelago situated to the northwest of the northern tip of the island of Mindoro. 7 islands of the some 7,641 islands that make up the Philippines today. That's a lot of islands. It's about 75 miles southwest of Manila by sea. The islands originally settled by the indigenous Tagalog people, the largest group of people living in the Philippines before the Spanish showed up as colonizers back in the 16th century. And these islands look like paradise. Lubang has long sandy beaches, lush rainforests, picturesque coastlines of rocky cliffs. Beginning with the cove at the southernmost point, there's headlands with rocky cliffs that drop dramatically into the sea. Behind the cove, forested mountains, the top of the southern headland, a meadow where today you can see traditional Filipino-style houses with floors of bamboo slats, walls of woven bamboo mats, and roofs of palm leaves. It's a small island, just 48 square miles. About 20,000 people live there today, spread across the island in farms and a few small towns. A bit more than half that lived there when Hiro arrived, around 12,000 people. Hiro arrived there ready to fight, and he would not be alone. Also on the island would be a group of soldiers from the 357th Independent Regiment, the airfield garrison, a radar squad, an air intelligence squad, and a Navy group, but no officers, as well as an air maintenance crew of about 55 men. After his arrival, Hiro received his formal orders, and Takahashi specified Hiro's aims. Hamper the enemy attack on Luzon. Simple but tall order. The first thing he needed to do was destroy the Lubang airfield and the pier at the harbor. These were his two main goals. These will be his two main goals for so fucking long. This episode is about to get real surreal. If the enemy was still able to land on the airfields, he was to destroy their planes and kill their crews. Ordinarily, there would be two leaders he would report to for a mission like this, but there wasn't another person to spare. So Hiro, along with the other officers, only reported to General Akira Muto, Chief of Staff for the 14th Area Army. Muto impressed on them that the war was not going very fucking well for Japan and needed all the help they could get. The division commander also had some instructions that Hiro would take very, very seriously. Maybe way, way, way too seriously. He commanded that whatever Hiro and his fellow men did, they were to never kill themselves. And he told them they might end up fighting alone on the island for like a long-ass time. Like it might take like 5 years for them to, for Japan to come back and get them. But he said that eventually, just be patient, eventually the army will come back for you. And he said that until Japan sent somebody to retrieve them, even if they had been whittled down to just one soldier, Hiro had to continue mounting attacks against the enemy. He had to keep trying to destroy this airfield and this pier. And when Hiro accepted these commands, holy fuck, he accepted them deep down into his bones. Over the following several hours, he would learn all about Lubang with the help of a map. But even so, Lubang was no bigger than a playing card on this map. Almost no information about his terrain on it, so not very helpful. Major Takaguchi promised to give him a better map once the Lubang airfield was built by the Japanese, built up more. In the meantime, Hiro was to gather equipment, dynamite, landmines, hand grenades, and more, which he did and loaded onto a truck. Then on December 30th, 1944, he received 5,000 yen in military currency from Major Takahashi. What he did not get was a better map, and that will suck for him in the coming decades. After he got his money, it was time to load up onto the truck. On the truck was also a sergeant named Suzuki and 6 of his men who were going to Lubang to retrieve some aviation fuel. The truck soon stopped at the side of the Banzai Bridge, where Hiro found a, quote, native motor sail vessel. Unsure exactly what kind of boat that means, but that's what he wrote in his memoir. Probably simple fucking canoe or something, I don't know. Simple sailboat. Waiting for him. The captain told him to load up his shit. He did. Around 9 p.m. that night, the boat departed. Around 1 a.m., they passed the island of Carregador in the mouth of Manila's Bay. Instead of following the shoreline, or I guess it's Corregidor. I don't know. I think I'm saying it right there. Instead of following the shoreline, they continued to sail west due to enemy torpedo boats constantly popping in and out of offshore waters. Around dawn, the island of Lubang began to appear on the horizon. Gradually, it grew larger, and before long, Hiro could make out the individual palm leaves through his binoculars. There were mountains, but small ones, around 1,800 feet high, and the whole island was narrow, about 6 miles from north to south, 18 miles from east to west. They were now rapidly approaching the pier in Tilkit, the same pier Hiro had been told to destroy. The captain ordered the crew to camouflage the ship with palm leaves. Once ashore, Hiro boarded a truck, set off for the small town of Lubang on the west end of the island. There, he went to meet Lieutenant Hayakawa, one of his contacts, who would give him the soldiers he needed. When he handed the lieutenant his orders, he looked confused. Didn't they mean boats? He asked. There had been some kind of mix-up. The code they were using at division headquarters had no word for guerrilla warfare. Instead, they'd used the word for guerrilla, and then another word that can also be interpreted as meaning boat. And because of that, the garrison commander thought that Hiro had come to lead them away from the island on something called guerrilla boats. They'd already prepared some canoes for this. To Hiro, this mix-up revealed something beyond a simple misunderstanding. It meant that the men did not want to wage guerrilla warfare. They wanted to get the fuck off the island. And the unfamiliar words had been interpreted to mean what they wanted to hear. He took this as an ominous sign that things for Japan really not going well. There was other bad news, too. Hiro couldn't destroy the pier until Japanese troops had gotten everything off of the island that they needed to get off. Hiro soon realized he had another problem. He was supposed to lead a mission, but if someone higher said they couldn't spare the troops he needed for that mission, oh well, he was shit out of luck. It's a little bit chaotic. The island is in chaos as Japan scrambled to keep the Allies from crushing them, as Germany is getting brutalized in Europe. On his own, Hiro now transports his munitions to the foot of a mountain where he then falls asleep on the grass. Just 2 days later, 8 in the morning, January 3rd, 1945, one of Hiro's lookouts spots an enemy fleet. Here we fucking go. There were 2 battleships, 4 aircraft carriers, 4 cruisers, and enough light cruisers to make up a total of 38 or 37 maybe. They said 37, 38 warships. And if that wasn't enough, the sea was peppered with landing craft. The massive Battle of Luzon, where Japan would see roughly 200,000 of their soldiers killed, was about to begin. Hiro quickly composed a message to headquarters, and 30 minutes after it was dispatched, the airfield garrison caught a signal ordering all units in western Luzon to take up battle stations, which seemed to indicate that the message had been received. Still, everyone on the island is anxious. What if a small portion of the fleet breaks away and attacks the island of Lubang? In preparation, Lieutenant Hayakawa put his troops on high alert, had them move caches of explosives further inland, but in the end, not a single ship would move towards Lubang. So Hiro now had some men prepared to blow up the pier. No more of their boats were leaving, and they wanted to make things hard as possible for the enemy if landing craft did come over. On February 1st, the U.S. began landing operations in west-central Luzon. Unfortunately for Hiro, this would happen on the shore opposite Lubang. In preparation, he and those with him moved their supplies further inland, so they didn't get to blow up the pier. They were starting to get ready to do that. Didn't happen. And now many of his men are too sick to work, including Lieutenant Hayakawa, who had a kidney problem, had to stop frequently to rest and drink coconut milk. Everybody's fucking stressed out. They got some bug going around. No matter how hard Lieutenant Hiro tries, he cannot convince anyone that guerrilla warfare is now a necessity. They don't want to fight. Instead, most of the men around him start talking about committing suicide, giving up their lives for the emperor. Nobody wanted to blow up the airfield or the pier. They didn't see the point. Resistance is futile sentiment had seemingly infected the minds of his fellow soldiers. They'd also heard that the enemy now had steel plates to make new runways in record time anyway. And they had those damn Higgins boats we talked about a few months ago here in Timesuck. So even if the Japanese destroyed the pier, the Americans could still storm the shit out of the beaches. Still, Hiro wanted to do something, anything, to help the Japanese war effort. So he turns to subterfuge, using old parts of planes to look like new planes. That way enemies from above might bomb the rubble, waste their bombs. Not realize they're bombing useless parts. And that happened. That worked. When Allied bombers did soon fly over his island, they bombed the decoys. Then Japan's 15th and 16th Coastal Advance Squads arrived at the harbor in the little village of Tilkit, a place full of mostly Japanese soldiers still. The arriving soldiers were members of suicide squads, men in small wooden boats loaded up with explosives. The idea was that when a ship appeared offshore, these squads would blow them up by running their boats into it. Fucking hardcore, man. Death before dishonor. But before they did that, they needed to be fed first, and there was already a strain on the local islanders to feed the men that were there. And as their rice supplies dwindled, the men became more and more unruly. Now, not only would they not consider beginning guerrilla warfare, they barely considered being useful soldiers on any level. Lieutenant Hiro began to hope that the enemy would just come ahead and, land on the island so that his fellow soldiers would have to fight. And that would, in fact, happen in just a few short weeks. On February 28th, 1945, about 50 American soldiers landed on the west side of the island near a village called Tomibo. The Americans moved cautiously, disembarking from their landing craft, stepping gingerly over the terrain, their rifles ready. It doesn't say in sources if this is soldier. I'm guessing it's probably Marines, but possibly not. Hiro thought this was a trick of some kind. Something was wrong. They just weren't enough of them to capture the island. They must know that, he thought. He wondered if maybe a bigger force was coming in behind them to ambush him after baiting the Japanese in. Another lieutenant on the island was especially gung-ho to go fight, though, saying he would take a couple of men over there and just fucking wipe him out. And Hiro was like, I don't know about that. That seems like a bad idea. Maybe you should wait. But this lieutenant would not listen. He hopped into a truck with 15 men, machine guns, and drove off. The rest of the day passed. Hiro did not see the Americans again. Then around 1 o'clock in the morning that night, 2 other officers showed up with the remains of a different crew of men from near the airfield. 30 minutes later, they spotted flames rising in Lubang. Seemed like the small force of Japanese soldiers who had taken off with that gung-ho lieutenant had come under enemy fire, but there was no way to be sure. Then a fleet of American ships appeared and began their bombardments on Tilkit. Palm trees and parts of houses are flying through the air, and soon the entire town has been fucking just decimated. Then a few men who had rode off with that gung-ho lieutenant returned. He wasn't with them. He had been killed, along with almost that entire squad. After about 2 hours, the bombardment ended, but as soon as it did, shells from enemy land mortars began raining down on the encampment. Hiro was in. Enemy planes swooped down, dropping 200-pound parachute bombs. Just then, American troops landed in earnest. An entire battalion of Marines, so yeah, probably was the Marines before too, led by 4 tanks. They marched off toward the village of Vigo, a mile or two west of Tilkit. One unit split off, continued westward towards Lubang. Hiro knew it was now time to head to the fucking jungle and hide. However, the intelligence squad and the coastal attack squad disagreed on what to do. They wanted to hold out where they were, fight until the bitter end, which wouldn't be very long. As enemy shells began to fall, 2nd Lieutenant Hiro ordered whoever was underneath him in the chain of command to retreat now. Wounded soldiers who were able to walk to move deeper into the mountains, carrying as many provisions as they could. And they would walk for about 30 minutes before they heard guns coming from the exact direction they were walking towards. The enemy had cut off their retreat. Hiro now sent a lookout ahead to confirm the enemy position, and the guy soon limped back with the fucking bullet in his leg. Also, mortars were getting closer to their new position. Luckily, they were able to take cover, hide for the night, but only after Hiro lost the tip of his finger to an enemy bullet. Man, talk about a close call. Holy shit. Following night, the group he was with carried out a raid on troops blocking their retreat and took heavy losses. They now had lost literally all of their other commanding officers, every single other lieutenant. Now, 2nd Lieutenant Hiro finds it difficult to get the remaining troops under his command to listen to him. He said the remaining troops are running around like chickens with their heads cut off, firing willy-nilly, scaring themselves and each other. Hiro tried to remain calm, all things considered. He had a plan. They needed to retreat to a small mountain range covered with dense forestry on the center of the island. But first, they still needed to wipe out more enemy troops to the rear. He waited until March 2nd to try this. That night, he took 15 men with him and crept ahead. They discovered that the airfield had been claimed intact. The pier also had not been blown up. Hiro and the others had not accomplished either of the 2 main objectives they'd been sent to the island with. Still, he thought he could accomplish other objectives, and he would accomplish those objectives in time. First, they needed to make it to the hills, though. And they did. They reached the spot he had in mind, and the enemy had withdrawn far enough for them to not have to engage with them. On their way back, they found the body of a soldier Hiro had shared numerous conversations with on the island, Private First Class Muranaka. With the dagger his mom had given him, Hiro cut off the man's little finger, put it in an inner pocket in his jacket, so he could hopefully take it back to Japan and the man's family, so that, while they might not have a body, they could at least be able to cremate some of their child's remains. And nearly everyone in Japan is cremated, by the way, like over 99% of people. On the morning of March 3rd, more scattered Japanese troops arrived to join Hiro and his men. Later that day, a message came back from the sick tent asking for explosives. When Hiro asked what was up, a young man said that they had 20 sick men, all gravely wounded, and that they wanted to kill themselves. And blowing themselves up seemed like the most efficient way to do it. That's fucking hardcore. These guys were literally begging to be given permission so they could explode themselves. Hiro gave his consent, but asked them to wait to blow themselves up until the enemy was nearby, so they wouldn't just waste dynamite. That is so darkly funny to me. Oh, okay. All right, fine. You can have some dynamite. But first, you gotta promise me they're not just gonna fucking waste it, right? Just on blowing yourselves up selfishly. Lure over some Americans, right? Lure them over. Tell them you got beef jerky or comic books or posters of pinup models, whatever Americans like. And then you can blow yourselves to smithereens if you take some of them with you. Later, Hiro came back, found no trace of the tent or the corpses. Nothing was left but a huge gaping hole in the ground. They truly did blow themselves the fuck up. That's a wild way to go out. Day or two later, Hiro and some remaining soldiers would actually run into an American scouting party. They threw some hand grenades in their direction, scared them away. Then the next morning, they killed an American soldier. But when they got to the top of the mountain, where all of their reserve stash were supposed to be, nobody was there. The other Japanese soldiers had been ordered to retreat to Tilkit or to Vigo. Lieutenant Hayakawa had ordered his men to the upper reaches of the Vigo River, but then was killed along with 10 of his men. The 15th Coastal Attack Squad, led by Captain Suki, had attempted to storm the enemy barracks at Tilkit, but failed. Captain Suki would soon fall ill and die. The 16th Coastal Attack Squad would launch an unsuccessful raid in the Tilkit area and later hide along the hills south of the port, and Hiro never heard from them. As far as he knew, he was the only Japanese officer left on the island now, at least one trained for combat. There were 2 non-combatant officers named Corporal Shoichi Shimada and Corporal Yoshio Fujita. The only people he was now able to communicate with were the 10 members of the garrison unit, 4 members of the air intelligence squad, 4 members of the air maintenance crew, and 2 members of the Navy squad, 20 in all. Everyone else appeared to be either missing or dead. Despite this, Hiro still hoped to lead these remaining men in an attack on the airfield. He still wants to fucking get that airfield and orders them to stretch out their rice supply as long as possible. He figured if they only ate 4 bowls a day, they could hold out until August. But within just a few days, the men began to argue over portion sizes and even started to steal from the communal rice stash. So when Corporal Fujita asked Hiro if he could lead some of the men somewhere else so they couldn't all be ambushed and eliminated at once, Hiro was like, yeah, fuck yeah, get away from my rice. Better to have them somewhere else, or we didn't have to keep such a close eye on them. So now the remaining 20 men break into 2 separate cells. Hiro joins up with Corporal Shimada and 1 private. The others split into 4 small groups. Now Hiro wants to move the main supply stash to a new area so American GIs won't be able to find it. And on April 18th, Hiro begins that process. Unfortunately, while he's in the middle of that process, an enemy cleanup squad storms into the woods firing like crazy. Right? Shit. The private that Hiro had added to his team is almost immediately shot and killed. None of the other groups who had split off showed back up after hearing gunfire to help him out, except for 1 dude, private named Kinshichi Kazuka, who had been with an air intelligence squad until they abandoned him when he came down with acute nephritis and inflammation of his kidneys. After wandering around in the foothills for over a week, living on nothing but tubers and leaves from potato vines and coconut milk, Kazuka recovered enough to join Hiro and Corporal Shimada. And now the 3 men wander around for a few weeks, quietly scavenging whatever they can find to eat. This fucking sucks so bad to go through this. Then in May of 1945, Lieutenant Hiro, Kazuka, and Corporal Shimada heard mortars and machine guns. It was coming from the vicinity of the island's south shore. It was immediately clear that one of the other Japanese groups had been attacked and surrounded. Hiro later found out that a group of survivors from Captain Suki's squad, that 15th Coastal Attack Squad, had made their way to a beach. They were resting there when they were attacked. All but 2 were killed. This would be the last organized enemy attack on Japanese survivors. But afterwards, an American squad would patrol the ridge every morning for weeks, occasionally, firing a couple shots. Meanwhile, in a very different part of the world, on May 8th, 1945, World War II in Europe comes to an end. As the news of Germany's surrender and Hitler's suicide reaches the rest of the world, joyous crowds gather to celebrate in the streets, clutching newspapers, right, declaring victory in Europe. Lieutenant Hiro and the 2 dudes he is now with on the island have no fucking idea this is happening. And they won't have any idea about what will happen at the end of the summer, when the U.S. drops a bomb on the city of Hiroshima, August 6, 1945. 3 days after the U.S. dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima, a second atomic bomb is dropped on Nagasaki, August 9th. As far as Hiro knows, though, Japan, they're still doing great. They can still win the war. He's still got to fight. At 7 p.m., August 14th, 1945, President Harry S. Truman announces the unconditional surrender of Japan to reporters gathered at the White House. The next day, Japanese Emperor Hirohito broadcasts a surrender to the Japanese people on Radio Tokyo. Then on September 2nd, aboard the Missouri, Supreme Commander of Allied Forces Army General Douglas MacArthur signs the instrument of surrender for the UN, and Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz signs it for the U.S. Japanese representatives sign it as well, and delegates from other allied nations, including China, the UK, Soviet Union, France, Australia, Canada, Netherlands, New Zealand, they all witness the ceremony. And with that, the war with Japan is over for most people. Following day, September 3rd, Japanese General Tamayuki Yamashita, military governor of Japan to the Philippines, also surrenders. But Hiro Onoda and his fellow soldiers, they got no fucking clue any of this has happened. They still fully believe World War II is on. Oh, it is not even close to being done.
Nothing is over! Nothing! You just don't turn it off!
Yes, that was Rambo. I haven't pushed that button in a while, and I'm gonna be pushing it quite a bit today because it's perfect for the story. He is like a Japanese Rambo at one point in the story. Quick note going forward. Most of the information comes from Hiro's autobiography, but he did leave out some important details. Mostly how he and his fellow couple of remaining soldiers would not just steal from the island's villagers for the next 3 decades, but that they would also kill them. They shot and killed around 30 people over the years, thinking that they were still fighting. Such is something to keep in mind about his adventures going forward. So now it's around the middle of October, 1945. When Hiro and a handful of remaining soldiers first see leaflets urging them to surrender. They had just killed a cow in the mountains. They were trying to haul its meat back to their hidden jungle camp when they run into 5 or 6 islanders who flee after tossing them a piece of paper, kind of throw it on the ground in their direction. Printed on the paper in Japanese is a statement saying, "The war ended on August 15th. Come down from the mountains." And Hiro, he didn't trust that shit for a second. For one thing, just a few days before, a Japanese patrol had been fired on by American soldiers. Why would that happen if the war was over, huh? They threw it away. Nice try, assholes. You're going to have to do better than that to trick 2nd Lieutenant Hiroo Onoda. Hiro stayed living in the woods on the slopes of the mountain along with a few soldiers he'd managed to pick up for his cell. They set up little tents, spread boards on the ground to sleep on. Sometimes they were able to supplement their rations of rice with some stolen beef or harvested bananas. Mostly, however, they just laid low. They didn't even tell a few other small cells of Japanese soldiers still on the island where they were. This shit is so crazy. In Hiro's mind, the most important thing was carrying out the objectives of the guerrilla warfare campaign he'd been assigned. Objectives he didn't even tell Corporal Shimada or Private Kazuma about, right? It was top secret. Around the end of 1945, a Boeing B-57 flew over their hideout, dropped a load of big, thick pieces of paper. Printed on the front were surrender orders from General Yamashita of the 14th Area Army and a directive from the Chief of Staff, and on the back was a map of Lubang with places where the leaflets were dropped marked with circles. But were these leaflets genuine? Fuck no. Nice try, Yankee scum. I mean, they were for sure genuine, but Hiro didn't think so. One thing that bothered Hiro about these leaflets is that they claimed to be in accordance with a direct imperial order. Neither Hiro nor anyone on the intelligence squad had ever heard of such a thing, though. The leaflet also seemed to imply that the general was issuing the order to himself. Later, Hiro would find out that this was simply a translation error. But at the time, it seemed like important evidence that the whole thing was an enemy trick. So he began the new year 1946, still determined to fight the war.
Nothing is over! Nothing! You just don't turn it off!
He and his men rarely heard guns anymore, except for some occasional machine gun fire. But there was an aircraft carrier off the coast. Why was that there if the war was over? At the beginning of February, Corporal Shimada and some scouts ran into some Philippine soldiers in a truck at the bottom of the mountains. The Filipinos thought they were being attacked and immediately opened fire, killing the two scouts. So now Hiro definitely thinks the war is still on. Hiro refuses to give his last few men any extra rations of rice, determined he'll need to be stingy with it to keep the campaign going. Right? It's going to last for years, possibly. Then in March, more leaflets to surrender are dropped. Then in April, 41 Japanese soldiers left on Lubang along with Corporal Fujita all surrender. God, there's a lot of fucking guys still hiding on the island. Shit's crazy. The ones who surrendered would continue leaving notes for the holdouts now that said shit like, nobody's searching for you now, but the Japanese, come on out. But Hiro and a few others with him, they weren't going to be so easily tricked. Nice try. Go fuck yourselves, traitors. We still fight for the honor of Imperial Japan. They now assumed that the Americans were forcing the Japanese they had taken prisoner to attempt to trick the remaining soldiers into surrendering. Every time the searchers called out to his cell, Hiro would simply move them to a new location. That summer, Allies dropped even more leaflets, now with messages handwritten in pencil, in quote, good Japanese, which did make an impression on Private Akatsu. He asked Hiro if he'd ever wondered if the war was really over. Hiro said he didn't think so. But Corporal Shimada said, I sort of have a feeling that it is. Kazuka remained silent. Hiro, worried he was losing his grip on his men, decided to go investigate for himself now. If he came back, he said, they would know that the war was over. If he didn't, they would know to stay hidden. It was still ongoing. Hiro also wanted to try to rescue the Japanese soldiers who he thought had been taken prisoner, men who had been tricked by other prisoners. He thought if he could get into the prison where they were being held, they could all escape together. But then Kazuka spoke up. Why did Hiro need to do this? He said that Hiro was the one who had led them so far and they needed him to keep leading them. Hiro admitted that he didn't want to risk his life to save a bunch of, quote, nincompoops who had gotten themselves captured. Harsh words. Pulling nincompoop out of the insult drawer. Shit's getting serious. And with that, Shimada agreed to keep fighting, and Akatsu did too. Hiro had just turned 24. Corporal Shimada is 31. Kazuka is 25, and Akatsu is 23. The four of them made up the last Japanese resistance on Lubang now. Just 4 dudes. Everyone else has been killed, they've been captured, or they've surrendered. These 4 would now move from place to place, careful not to stay at one location for too long. In the first year, they slept squished together in one little tent, trying their best to stay dry through the island's rainy season, which lasted from July all the way until mid-October. Still, rain would come often into the tent. Their skin would turn white. When the rain finally ended, they would race out into the open, marveling at the sight of the stars above. Captain Shimada, as the oldest and most experienced, regaled them with stories of his life. He had grown up in Agawa, not far from the northwest outer edge of Tokyo. He'd come from a farming family. In the off-season, he had gone into the mountains to tend to a charcoal kiln, as was a tradition in his village. Living alone in little huts, the young men of his village would learn to forage for themselves, and the skills he'd picked up now came in very handy for him and his fellow soldiers in Lubang. Shimada taught Hiro how to weave straw sandals, how to make a net for fishing and other shit. Kazuka, meanwhile, was quiet and reserved, the son of a farmer in Hachioji, a distant suburb of Tokyo. His family was well off. He had owned a racehorse. Akatsu, as Hiro would later write, quote, was the weakest of us, both physically and morally. Fucking Akatsu! He was always the one falling behind, losing track of the others. So he was put in charge of gathering firewood, bringing fresh drinking water from the nearest creek, while Shimada did most of the hard physical labor, and Kazuka and Hiro made tools, stood guard, planned overall movements, kept the fucking mission going. And yeah, they're still planning on waging guerrilla warfare. They still had some supplies. Each man had an infantry rifle, 2 grenades, 2 pistols, plenty of ammo. But they had very little rice, and for a long time they ate so little they were too weak to transport much from location to location. When their rice finally ran out, they went and found the rice that had been hidden for some other Japanese troops on the islands, but then that ran out too. They might have been able to ask the islanders for food as they had done when they first arrived, but the islanders had long ago now allied themselves with the Americans, even working as guides. They were fucking enemies now. Since they carried knives, cut down trees, and guns for protection, the 4 Japanese soldiers were eager to steer clear of them. But when the islanders set up camp in the mountains while they cut timber, they often left some sacks of rice hanging in the trees around their camps, and Hiro and his men would start to look for these sacks, though they were careful not to take the rice when the islanders were nearby, since that would be a sure sign that the Japanese were still present. This was their life now. Wandering around the island, stealing rice here and there, killing a cow from time to time, trying not to get bit by a cobra, hide in the jungle. And they'll do this for decades. The mountains provided the best cover. That's where they tended to hide the most. The southern side features small sandy beaches, rugged sea-torn cliffs. Most of the island's population of 12,000 lived in the south, so they almost always avoided the southern part of the island. Gradually, the soldiers developed a circuit of sorts, moving from point to point, staying at each location between 3 and 5 days. A full circuit would take a month. They went fast. Usually took about 2 months, since they sometimes stayed at some locations longer if there was, food there, especially, beef or bananas. All the while, Hiro kept a careful mental tally of their movements. He fully believed that once they finally ran into some other Japanese soldiers, some reinforcements, he would need to provide his reports so they could plan a counterattack. Their first objective, once more soldiers arrived any fucking day now, was to recapture that airfield, right, and destroy it. So he focused on that. He also made a complicated plan for how many bananas they could harvest without exhausting the island's natural supply. But that plan started to get off track because, once again, people are stealing food. Even with just 4 soldiers left, it was impossible to stop anyone from taking more than their fair share, especially since eating was largely their only pleasure. Only thing that filled their days, marked the time as they, hung out on the island. If he cracked down too hard on his remaining 3 men, they might, form a mutiny. He wondered how long could all of them keep going like this? A long time. Turns out a real long time. Katsu finally deserted, though, in September of 1949, 4 years after the foursome had first come together. He had disappeared 3 times before, but each time Shimada would find him, bring him back, knowing where he would set up camp and find food, because they'd all been doing this, together for so long now. They thought of Akatsu as weak and ultimately unhelpful, so they never told him much about what they were up to, fearing that he would someday be captured by the enemy and divulge their mission secrets. And maybe that war on him had the effect of making him feel left out, not wanted, and thus not loyal to them. So they weren't, shocked when he finally bounced for good. Shimada went out to look for him for a little while, but he came back a week later without Akatsu and completely worn down. They would later be very surprised to learn that Akatsu had surrendered near a small village on the eastern end of the island, but not until nearly 6 months after he had left the group. He had just grown sick of them, apparently, and decided it would be better to be on his own, and that eventually he couldn't take being a solo anymore. About 10 months after Akatsu's departure, they found a note on the ground saying, "When I surrendered, the Philippine troops greeted me as a friend," and it was written in Akatsu's handwriting. So was this genuine? Fuck no. Did they think Hiro Onoda was born yesterday? No. You have to do better than that, you white devils, you Caucasian cocksuckers. I mean, it was 100% genuine, but Hiro not buying it for a second.
Nothing is over! Nothing! You just don't turn it off!
Soon after they found that note, the remaining 3 men spotted a light aircraft circling slowly in the sky above Vigo. And they took this to mean that Akatsu had sold them out, told Allied scum where to find him. The war was still on, and they would still fight for the glory of Imperial Japan. So they moved to the other side of the island. Fight, 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 fight! The very next day, they were faced with more trickery. They heard a loud speaker now, seemed to be coming from the north, and a voice was saying, "Yesterday we dropped leaflets from an airplane. You have 3 days, that is, 72 hours, in which to surrender. In the event that you do not surrender in that time, we will probably have no alternative but to send a task force after you. The voice was Japanese, with no trace of an accent, but the word choice sounded American. Japanese didn't typically refer to 3 days as 72 hours. Further proof the enemy had no honor. Clearly, the Americans are desperate. They're losing the war. Hiroo and his men just needed to hang on tight a bit longer, and then they would team up with reinforcements, and they would fucking crush the Allies and be heroes. Japan probably controlled all of Asia by now. For Hiroo in particular, regarding why he was so reluctant to accept all these offers as being legit, he'd come to the island on the direct orders of the division commander, and he believed that if the war was really over, there would be another order from the division commander releasing Hiroo of his duties. 3 days after the announcement, the 3 Japanese musketeers spotted a Filipino task force from a distance of about 150 yards. These troops, about 6 of them, were on a road that ran through a forest of palms. In the front was a man in a white hiking hat that they thought could have been a Katsu. They couldn't be sure. But as they hid over the following days, they convinced themselves that a Katsu had indeed betrayed them and had sent enemy troops after them to find and kill them. That motherfucker! They began to move through a quicker circuit of their campsites. And this time they vowed to fire on anyone they came across, even islanders, since they assumed islanders were actually enemies in disguise. Since whenever they had shot one in the past, troops would arrive soon afterwards. Weird. And I did mention that they sometimes shot villagers. I did. Just wanted to remind you, again, that before this is all said and done, Hiroo and his men will shoot and kill an estimated 30-ish random villagers and wound dozens and dozens of others. And they also sometimes wounded each other. They didn't always agree on what the right next move was, and they'd break into fistfights. And Hiroo thought that was a good thing. It gave them a chance to test their strength. As the months and years wore on, they discovered that more and more islanders were leaving rice in their pots, a sign the island was getting more prosperous. And sometime around 1950, they saw electric lights shining in the port village of Tillich. The ships coming into Tillich were changing too. At first, there had been small vessels that looked like little wooden shoes to them from afar, but now there were these big ocean liners. There was also a new lighthouse on Cabra, a neighboring island they could see. The soldiers were confused by this, but didn't take any of this to mean that the war was over, so they didn't give up. During the next rainy season, they built a better shelter with a roof made of palm leaves, confident that the search parties would not come to look for them in the bad weather. Mostly they were cheerful, but sometimes Shimada got moody, said things like, "I wonder whether it was a boy or a girl." His wife had been pregnant with her second child when he had left for the war nearly a decade ago now. February of 1952, a light aircraft from the Philippine Air Force began circling above the island. The 3 soldiers heard the loudspeaker but couldn't make out what it was saying, but they thought it was calling their names. And then the airplanes dropped some leaflets and flew off. But they weren't the same type of leaflets as before. They were personal letters. One was from Hiroo's oldest brother, Toshio. It said that the war had ended many years back, that his parents were both well, all of his brothers were out of the army, alive. There were also letters from Kazuka's and Shimada's families, along with family photographs, even a photo of Shimada's second child, a girl. Hiroo had only one thought regarding all this. Quote, "The Yankees had outdone themselves this time. Nice try, motherfuckers. Ah, shit. You must really be desperate to do this. Japan must be kicking the shit out of you. No surrender." He wondered how on earth they had managed to get these photographs. He just couldn't figure out how they'd pulled that off, but he knew it was a trick. And Shimada agreed with him. Shimada said, "It's supposed to be a photograph of my immediate family, but the man on the left, not my immediate family. He's only a relative. I think this is just another enemy hoax." Well done, gents. No one's going to trick you 3. You're too clever.
Nothing is over! Nothing! You just don't turn it off!
And they don't turn it off. About a month later, they heard another loudspeaker. A Japanese voice said, "I was staying at the Manila Hotel when I heard that you were still on the island. I came to talk with you. I'm Yutaka Tsuji of the Asahi newspaper." And Hiroo said dismissively, "They're at it again." And he and Shimada, who shook his head, decided to move camps. Kazuka, too, was like, "You have to do better than that." As they now move their camp, they find a Japanese newspaper. It was the first one they'd seen in 7 years. There was a story in bold type, circled in red pen, about how Lieutenant Colonel Nobuhiko Jimbo had gone to the Philippines to persuade the Filipino government to cancel its missions against the Japanese soldiers on Lubang. They paged the rest of the newspaper, were impressed by how the enemy had devised some means to get fake articles inside a real Japanese newspaper, but also they fucked up. They wrote about, quote, missions. If there were still missions being carried out, well, then the war was still on, wasn't it? Never surrender, never back down. When reinforcements show up, holy shit, oh, they're going to have a good laugh. June of 1953, Shimada is wounded badly in the leg in a fierce gun battle with enemy fishermen. They come across a group of 16 local fishermen minding their own goddamn business. And they decided to, quote, clear them out, as in massacre them. They fired on them. The fishermen scattered. Of course they did. But then one grabbed a gun. Pursuing him, the party was surprised by another fisherman who had a gun, who then fired 2 shots before he ran off. And the first hit Hiro's ring finger on his right hand. Man, another finger injury. The second went right through Shimada's right leg. Hiro carried him into the forest now, while Kazuka covered their rear from more ruthless fucking fishermen firing back, acting like they're just doing some harmless fishing on the beach, when really they're hoping to ambush these guys, stop them from finally destroying the airfield and the pier. Hiro soon found that the bullet had entered the inner side of his knee, the inner side of the knee of his companion, had gone through, quote, slantwise. Hiro took off his loincloth now, used it as a tourniquet, tying off his guy's leg above the wound, so that's cool. I'm sure that loincloth that he'd been wearing in the jungle, gathering his ball sweat for literal years, was super clean. Definitely not bacteria on that thing. The good news was that it appeared the bullet had not damaged the bone. Hiro was able to seal the wound off with cow fat and make a splint from knee to ankle. Very impressive that they're able to do this. After that, he will boil water every day, bathing the wound before sucking on the opening to bring out blood, possibly infected blood, and then apply more fresh cow fat. Fucking Nurse Hiro. This is nuts. Kazuka took charge of standing guard while he's doing this. After about 40 days of this shit, there's finally a thin layer of skin over the wound. Shimada can move his leg at the knee, but his big toe is rigid for some reason, and it makes it hard for him to get around quickly. However, by the end of October 1953, he's able to walk around with his gun on his shoulder, although he still limps. By God, they've done it! They've survived another clash with the enemy. But by the end of the year, Shimada seems gloomy. He just didn't have the vitality he had before the injury. His hair got much grayer. He's talking to himself a lot, staring at that photograph of his family. He's almost 40 years old, and he's starting to act like a little crybaby bitch, not willing to fight for the glory of Imperial Japan anymore. Come on, Shimada, fucking nut up already. But for real, how are all 3 of them not so depressed? Also, how crazy is it to be a villager on this island? To be like, hey, be sure and bring a gun with you when you go fishing. What? Why? Well, there's a couple Japanese soldiers out in the jungle. They will shoot at you. What? What are they doing out there? Fighting in World War II? But the war ended almost a decade ago. I know, but they don't. Around May 1954, another voice on a loudspeaker now says, I am Katsuo Sato, former chief of staff for the Naval Air Force. I would like to meet you in Locke. Locke is kind of like a county, also a tiny little village on the island. Hiro felt that this was clearly a trap. He thought, why would a naval officer come looking for army men? Almost got me, Yankee cocksuckers. Or Hiro Onoda isn't exactly wet behind the ears, though, is he? Not his first rodeo. Well, actually, it is my first rodeo. But holy shit, has this rodeo been going on for a fucking long-ass time. Like a crazy amount of time. And we all just wish that the rodeo clowns would show up and just call it off or something. But never surrender!
Nothing is over! Nothing! You just don't turn it off!
Meanwhile, after Shimada had recovered enough to move, they changed the location of their camp, but in doing so, they caught sight of a search party and had to head back down to the South Shore. But then another search party was waiting for them there. Damn it. There were about 35 of them. Instead of shooting, Hiro and his 2 fellow soldiers decided to run into the woods, mostly since Shimada, still not quite strong enough to mount a proper attack. Once in the woods, they debate about what to do next. Kazuka wants to cross the mountains. Hiro says they should go around them to conserve energy. Meanwhile, Shimada says he just wants to stay where he is. After all this time, is Imperial Japan finally going to lose World War II thanks to infighting? Shimada wants to stay put. That doesn't set well with Kazuka. To him, this is tantamount to a declaration of betrayal. Hiro tells Kazuka to calm down, though. Don't let them divide us. He says it was fine to hide out for a little bit. Next day, Kazuka and Hiro will go get some fruit, decide to lay them out to dry, right? Make some old school fucking fruit roll-ups they can eat later. They set out for a cliff by the valley where it'll be easier to catch some sunlight and dry that banana out. They sliced up their bananas, laid them out by a cliff, head back to where they were now making their camp. But then a couple of days later, they find out that Shimada, it's always starts with that mopey son of a bitch now. Well, he had moved the dried fruit down into the valley where it was highly visible. What the fuck, Shimada? Why not just surrender on behalf of all of Japan and lose the war already? This isn't good. It will signal to anyone who comes looking that they're near, especially the search party that they, just seen recently again down by the beach. For the moment, however, Hiro decides they should just leave the fruit after eating some of it while it's still light out. But then while Hiro is cooking up some other shit to go with their fruit, he sees slight movement. A man who looked like an islander had spotted the fruit and was climbing down into the valley to fucking eat it. And Hiro was like, not on my watch. He actually did react a bit like that. He fires on this guy. This guy is trying to get some banana screams, throws himself behind a rock. He's probably just, again, some fisherman. Kazuka now hides. So does Hiro. But Shimada continues to stand holding his gun, but not firing. He just, he's just kind of dead behind the eyes. And then a shot rings out and Shimada falls forward. The shot had not come from the valley, but from the slope across the river. So the two remaining soldiers scramble up the bank and run. They leave everything else behind, tools, ammo, bolo knives, and more. Hiro wouldn't know until much later that Shimada had gotten hit directly between the eyes by a Philippine Army mountain unit doing combat drills May 7th, 1954. Well now, after the infamous World War II battle for bananas, after the Lubang dried fruit ambush, they're down to just two dudes. All of Imperial Japan is counting on them to take out that airfield, to destroy that pier. Fucking never surrender.
Nothing is over! Nothing! You just don't turn it off!
10 days later, on May 17th, a Philippine Air Force plane, trailing a streamer behind it, passes over several times over the island, drops leaflets again. A loudspeaker keeps saying, Onoda, Kazuka, the war has ended. I'm sure they're like, Jesus Christ, you guys. But still, no, they're not going to fall for those tricks. He might have been born at night, but he wasn't born last night, okay? A few days after that, there was a noise in the forest that sent the two running. Hiro would only find out years later that Toshio, his brother, and Kazuka's younger brother, Fukuji, were on the island looking for them. Those fucking traitors. 2 months after Shimada was killed, they go back to the beach and pray for him, vowing they will avenge his death. It was the first time that Hiro had cried on the island. A few months later, Hiro will find a Japanese flag on which the names of his family and some of his relatives have been written. Instead of thinking this was a ploy, however, he starts to think that maybe it was a fake message from Japanese headquarters. He has some pretty interesting rationalization and reasoning here. He figures that, using some kind of simulation, the Japanese government had figured out how to win World War II. He thought a World War II victory was near. He thought if a Japanese spy was sent to contact Hiro, but was intercepted by the Americans would find out that the Japanese were planning to take over this very crucial to the whole World War, tiny-ass airfield on a barely populated island. So in order to block that move, the Americans would transfer sea and air forces to Manila, thus releasing pressure on Japanese troops in New Guinea, Malaysia, and French Indochina. From the Japanese viewpoint then, it was a good idea to make the Americans think that a spy was being dispatched to Lubang, so the flag, obviously intended for Hiro, was supposed to fall into enemy hands, and then the Americans were going to use it to try and lure super spy Hiro out. But he was, of course, not going to fall for that because his leaders had tipped him off. Japanese headquarters had taken the precaution of writing the names of one of his cousins and a sister-in-law slightly incorrectly. Fucking boom! Game, set, match. The Japanese commanders had thought of everything. Ho ho ho! Just you wait, Yankees. Soon, very soon, Hiroo Onoda will be living in California. And he will be the only one living there because the Emperor of Japan will have given him the entire state as a gift for his loyalty and extreme dedication. He didn't, of course, think that about California, but he did. He did now think his island is crucial to Japan winning all of World War II. He's been in the jungle for a long time. He's gotten a little bit nuts. Kazuka agreed with him about how important their mission is and how their superiors could clearly send them a warning with a flag with the two misspelled names. Of course, he thought this because Hiro has been brainwashing him. Hiro has been teaching him the principles of secret warfare. Soon after this, more and more fake, but real, leaflets are dropped on the island. But now the two soldiers, they're happy to see him. They're overjoyed. Oh, how they laugh at the sight of all these leaflets. They took all these leaflets as evidence the Japanese must be planning something to reconquer the Philippines once and for all. The fake messages kept adding up, like one containing a picture of Hiro Onoda's family that featured his parents, his older sister Chii, and her children, his younger sister Keiko, and a neighbor not related to them. Nice try. Bingo! Why the fuck is a neighbor in the photo? Huh? Come on. He didn't just crawl out of the cabbage patch. He didn't just fall off the termite truck. The turnip truck. You got to try harder to get a guy like this.
Nothing! You just don't turn it off!
You got to work a little harder to get a guy who's not fallen off the turnipy truck thing. Another time, Kazuka got a picture of his family, but it was obviously fake because they were standing in front of a new house that didn't belong to them. It's actually so sad. They just didn't know that Kazuka's family had moved, right? And they moved because Tokyo had been reduced to ashes, or the parts that they lived in. Because the flyers were printed on cheap paper, they also assumed there must be many other soldiers on the island and other islands across the Pacific. And so all of these messages, far from convincing them that the war is over, actually reaffirm their belief that the war is still fucking on and that a Japanese counterattack is going to come any day now. And if they're not on the island, the advance party won't be able to finally recapture that airfield. Their mission is so important still. This is so crazy. They still think they're going to recapture that airfield. It's early 1958 now. They've been hiding out in the jungle for 13 years. That is hard to fathom. I've been on multi-day camping trips, like sleeping in a tent. After about 3 days, like 4 tops, I'm very ready to go home. Take a nice shower, watch some TV. 13 years. And not on a relaxing, laying on a fucking beach vacation, drinking Mai Tais, tropical island type 13 years. No, tropical island, but continually worried about the enemy capturing or killing them. So you got to keep moving around the jungle. Hope you don't get bit by a literal venomous cobra 13 years. I don't know how they had the will to keep going. In the spring of 1958, and they're not even close to done, the Philippine Air Force begins building a radar base on Lubang Island, on the mountain that the Japanese soldiers had come to know as 500. To do so, they had to build a road, the island's first paved road. And one day, Hiro and Kazuka decided to check out how the road is coming along and see if they can sabotage its construction for the glory of Japan. And then they noticed that somebody caught sight of them. So now they fire on some poor random construction worker trying to kill him. And because of that, in May of 1959, a large search party arrives in Japan to look for them again. And what do? They hightail it out of the area, find another place on the island where the loudspeaker can't reach them. They did not hear the Japanese national anthem or the Japanese folk songs and popular songs the search party played for them. But that party was not going to give up quickly. By late November, they're still there. Hiro and Kazuka decide to go investigate to see what tactics they're using, and they hear the voices of their brothers over the loudspeakers now. Even Hiro had to admit, that voice sounds pretty good. Doesn't sound like a recording. Their tricks are getting better. He crept to the top of a little mountain, looked down, saw a man that, damn, if he didn't look exactly like his brother, had the same height and build. Holy shit. They cloned his brother. They fucking cloned him. How crazy is it they were willing to go to those lengths to catch him? But for real, he did think it was amazing that the Americans had obviously found a random prisoner who looked a little bit like his brother and who they then dolled up to look more like his brother and forced this guy to learn to imitate his brother's voice perfectly. He actually thought that. Toshio began singing his high school's fighting song, but towards the end, his voice cracks with emotion. So sad, right? He wants his little brother, please just come home, stop this madness. And Hiro takes hearing his brother's voice crack as a sign that he's not his brother, that he's an imposter, for sure. Oh no, he's not an imposter. It was just Toshio's last day on the island, and he started to choke up. Soon after that, the search party departs. But they did leave a lot behind. They left newspapers, magazines, all of them recent, depicting life in Japan. Hiro, of course, thinks that this is all obviously fake, right? If the war was over and Japan had lost, there shouldn't be any life in Japan. It should just be rubble. Everyone should be dead, and that's what he thought, because according to a popular battle cry in Japan in the early 1940s, before he left home, this popular battle cry was 1 million souls dying for honor. It meant that the population of Japan would rather die than surrender. All of them. If necessary, the women and children would kill as many Americans as they could with bamboo sticks until they were killed. Hiro had been brought up with this mentality and thought a thriving and prosperous Japan would only exist if the war was either won or still going on. Despite this belief, there is a lot for him and Kazuka to try and make sense of. Time had frozen for them, right? The start of 1945, really 1944, when they kind of started their mission. It was now 15 years later. They read about how somehow the Japanese Empire had become a democracy. The military was reformed. Interesting. They read about how China was now a communist nation under the leadership of some clown named Chairman Mao. Hiro thought it was clear that Mao must have come to power with the support of Japan, because Japan would obviously still be dominating China, right? He assumed that probably the eastern part of Siberia must have broken away from the Soviet Union, joined the Asian League, probably Java, Sumatra too. And that meant that Japan was just, a few strategic alliances away from now completely dominating the East. He found it weird that the U.S. and Japan were doing a lot of trading with each other, considering the U.S. was their sworn enemy. But Hiro worked that out in his head eventually with enough thinking. He had a lot of time to think. He decided that since the military had been reformed, there was probably now some kind of separation between military and economic spheres. So Japan and the U.S., they would just trade with each other and compete economically while obviously killing each other on the battlefield. And if that sounds weird, it's because it is. It makes no sense. But it made sense to Hiro. Also, anything that didn't make sense to him, he would just, write it off as, well, propaganda, just nonsense. Like a piece about Tomoyuki Yamashita, the commander of the 14th Area Army to which Hiro belonged, saying that he had been executed for a bunch of war crimes? What? There was another article he thought was made up too, an article about the Futamata school, where Hiro had received his secret training for the mission he was on. Apparently the government had been investigating the school for, quote, secret warfare, and found that nobody was quite sure who was issuing the orders and under what authority they were to do so. Hiro thought this was a secret message to tell him that his division had not forgotten him, because clearly he thought everyone at the school knew where the orders had come from. So yeah, that's how Hiro was able to rationalize away all the signs that the war had ended a long time ago. So much cognitive dissonance, so much sunk cost fallacy. Meanwhile, life on Lubang, it's getting harder. Their clothes always rotten from the rain. They're still wearing rags from their original uniforms, the same clothes for 15 years. They had to undergo constant tedious repairs, sewing with a piece of wire. For thread, they would use a hemp-like plant that grew in the woods there. Soon this wasn't enough, though. They had to start stealing from the islanders. To do that, the soldiers would scare them off with gunfire or fucking kill them. Make off with anything in their stores, canteens, tents, shoes, blankets. Oh, and I should add that just a reminder that, again, they killed around 30 villagers in various skirmishes. Around 1965, synthetic fibers appeared on Lubang, and they gratefully accepted some articles of clothing made from them, and by accepted, I mean stole from villagers. Also stole some vinyl plastic, which they used, for help in the rain, to wrap up their guns and stuff, to stay dry. By this time, their principal food is bananas boiled with dried meat and coconut milk. They come up with their own little recipe. Sometimes they hunted for water buffaloes. Sometimes they'd kill horses. From each animal, they could make about 250 slices of smoked meat, which would last them about 4 months if they ate a slice a day. Sometimes they also managed to steal canned goods from the islanders like coffee, and when they stole it, they called stealing it stepping out for the evening. And again, how weird is this for the villagers? Mom, how many times have I told you, you have to lock your doors at night? Do you want a couple middle-aged Japanese World War II soldiers to keep stealing your shit or to execute you for war crimes against Japan? I wonder if some parents worked these two dudes into like fables for their kids. You got to be good. You got to listen to mom and dad, because if you don't, what's going to happen? I know, Mom. Japanese World War II soldier ghosts will sneak into our rooms and chew us dead. That's right, sweetie. Surprisingly, these two guys were rarely sick going through all this. They took careful pains to keep track of their health, monitoring their urine for signs of dehydration, monitoring their stool for signs of malnutrition. They would bathe in the rivers, brush their teeth with fiber from palm trees. As a result, Hiro only would get a fever twice during his entire roughly 30 years on the island. They were also careful to never leave traces of their campsites. They would even wash rocks they cooked on so they wouldn't have oil on them. All this was to keep the area under their control until the rest of the Japanese showed up. They also decided in the early 1960s to take a POW. They grabbed some local islander and interrogated him for information. They snuck into this poor dude's farmhouse while he was out. When he came home, fucking kidnapped him. Bam! Dude had to have been the last POW taken during World War II, because he was taken in 1964. Oh my God. After taking this very confused man out into the mountains, he told him everything he knew, which wasn't much. But he told him what the price of cigarettes was, what the average pay for a day's labor on the island was. He didn't have World War II updates, or he wouldn't give them up. He didn't have any because, the war had been over for almost 20 years. Hiro and Kazuka eventually decided they learned all they were going to from him, and they let him go. They still were not captured after doing that shit. In late 1965, they have now been in the jungle for over 20 years. They would acquire more information through a new transistor radio they stole. They took the radio from a cabin along with some socks, shirts, and some trousers. The radio was a Toshiba 8-transistor set, seemed to be in good shape. When they turned it on, the first thing they heard was a man speaking in Japanese. Today being December 27th, this is my last broadcast of the year. Listen in again next year. In the meantime, Happy New Year to you all. Over the following weeks, they would start listening to more stations. Japan shortwave radio, broadcast from Australia, broadcast from the BBC. Once again, they didn't believe anything they heard. They were impressed, though, that the Americans kept getting better at subterfuge. So good, they could fake such well-produced, legitimate-sounding broadcasts. At this point in the story, I started to think of Dumb and Dumber. going through all this. It's just very funny for me to picture just a clueless Japanese Jim Carrey and Jeff Daniels.
Hi, y'all.
Hey, allihopa.
Hey, guys. We're going on a national bikini tour, and we're looking for 2 oil boys who can grease us up before each competition.
I love the scene.
You are in luck. There's a town about 3 miles that way. I'm sure you'll find a couple guys there.
Okay, thanks.
They just do not understand what's happening around them. Hiro and Kazuka even thought it was plausible that Japan had hosted the Olympics while World War II still raged on, even though they had American athletes, because they'd always heard that there were no national boundaries in the world of sports. So yeah, you could be having like a world war and still, send some athletes around. A year after they acquired the radio, these two suffer a setback regarding their plans of world domination. Kazuka injures his foot. He had stepped on a thorn that went deep into his heel. Hiro got it out, sanitized the injury as best he could. He is fucking good at survival, my God. But by the next morning, the leg was swollen all the way up to the thigh. Over the next week, it would go down, the swelling. But then while they were walking one day, Kazuka's leg crumpled underneath him. His leg then swelled again with infection. Now he can't walk. And he would be bedridden, ground-ridden, I guess, through much of the rainy season of 1966. And they spent those months mostly listening to the radio, hearing mainly about horse races and music programs. Now let's fast forward all the way to the fall of 1972. This pair had spent the late 60s and early 70s living as they did on the island, moving from place to place constantly, settle down in one spot for a little time, steal from some islanders, sneak off, avoid detection. Hiro Onoda is 50 years old now. He's been on the island since he was a few months away from turning 23. He's been there over 27 years. He's been hiding in the jungle on this one little island for the majority of his life. Overwhelming majority of his adult life. That is fucking insane. Same for Kinshichi, Kazuka. He's also 50. He's also been there for over 27 years. And they still think the war is ongoing. This is a long-ass war. They still think Japan can win. They still think they need to retake that airfield.
You mean not good like 1 out of 100?
I'd say more like 1 out of 1,000,000.
Thinking about their odds.
So you're telling me there's a chance?
Yeah!
In early October, the two began to take down the rainy season structure, start up towards a ridge. They intended to make a bonfire of the islanders' rice to show the islanders and whatever Japanese watching that their presence on the island was still very fucking strong. They'd have to be careful, though, because the island now had police. As they climbed the ridge, they spotted some islanders gathering rice, their military targets, and they fired their guns on the islanders, and they scattered. These guys must be so tired of this shit, the islanders. Like, God damn it, how are they still out there? As Kazuka set fire to a small pile of rice now, Hiro gathered up some of what the islanders had left behind, 2 bolo knives, cigarettes, matches, some coffee. With their important World War II military mission now complete of fucking up these guys' rice, they decided to head off, but noticed another pile of rice sacks. Should they make another bonfire? Hell yeah, they should. That'll teach those villagers to side with the Yankee scum. Setting down their packs and guns, they start to build the next bonfire. But just then, shots ring out on both sides of Hiro. Hiro dives for his gun. Kazuka can't get to his. He has been shot in the shoulder. Gunfire is still incoming. Hiro fires a couple of shots off, gives him enough time to flee. Kazuka, though, does not follow him because he'd been shot again in the chest this time. A second later, blood begins to pour out of his mouth, and he falls forward dead. Another casualty of World War II. How crazy is it that is actually a true statement? This dude literally died fighting in World War II in 1972. I know it's tragic, but it's also like, it's what the fuck? In his mind, he is still very much fighting in World War II, and he dies in 1972 in combat. Less than a year from when the United States is going to withdraw their last troops from the Vietnam War. And now Hiro is alone. And is he going to lay down his gun? Fuck no. His mission far from over.
Nothing is over! Nothing! You just don't turn it off!
Over the next few days, he moves to a place called Kamano Point, settles there to build a new mountain hut. As he's looking around, a helicopter appears overhead. It was yet another search party. They would once again call out through the loudspeakers. This time they say, Onoda, wherever you are, come out. We guarantee your safety. And he's like, yeah, right. More lies. Still not falling for it. But he is sick of hiding. He has had it. He's close to snapping.
Oh, that's it. I've had it with this dump. We got no food. We got no jobs. Our pets' heads are falling off.
That's my favorite Dumb and Dumber quote. Our pets' heads are falling off. Instead of hiding, on the evening of November 19th, he walks out into the open along a paved road below the radar base, starts chasing a man with a rifle. He's kind of snapping a little bit. And then I guess he remembers at some point he can be easily shot and killed, and he comes to his senses somewhat and disappears again. He was now going to sneak back off into the mountains, but then he hears his siblings' voices coming over the loudspeaker. Tadao talked about how he had moved to Brazil with his family. Both his sister, Chie, and brother, Toshio, tell funny stories about their shared childhoods. And this time, he is convinced it actually is their voices, but he is worried that the Americans have captured his family and put them up to this to destroy his very important mission. So he keeps hiding. One evening about 2 weeks later, he goes to the place where Kazuka had been shot, and there he finds a book, and inside it is a message from his brother Tadao, telling him to leave anything he wanted to say in the book. He also saw that a tombstone had been placed where Kazuka had fallen. Someone had put a wreath of flowers and some incense, another sign there were Japanese people nearby. He still doesn't know what to do, though. He decides that the next morning he will leave his hiding place and go up into the valley for fresh water. There he finds newspapers talking about Kazuka's death, which mentions erroneously that he'd had some money tucked into his pocket. Nope. It was tucked into his belt. Boom! They almost had him. They almost tricked him, but not quite. That was an obvious sign that the newspapers had been doctored in Hiro's mind. One step forward for this guy, two steps back. Hiro now decides that this new expedition of people trying to find him are actually a group sent by the Japanese government to conduct a detailed survey of Lubang. Since the radio had said that Japan had become a major economic power, it might have been that one aim of the search party was to spread a lot of money around Lubang, win the islanders over, bribe them. The appeals to Hiro to come out then were intended to throw American intelligence off track. Looking at it this way, the pleas were really pleas for him not to come out, since the search party would have to go back to Japan without accomplishing its real objective. This is what he's rationalizing. If they really wanted to come out, he figures, they would have given him a telephone so he could speak to an intelligence agent, or a machine gun so he could defend himself. Does that make sense to you? Yeah, it doesn't make sense to me either, but it made sense to Hiro. And so back into hiding he goes, waiting for reinforcements. He spends New Year's Day of 1973 on the south shore of the island. Alone. On January 3rd, he headed up toward the port village of Tillich. On the way, he hears a recording that says, "Hiro, this is Tadao." Again, it's his brother. "Many of the search party have left, and the soldiers who are here are only trying to protect us. They are not trying to kill you. If a Philippine soldier points his gun at you, I would jump in front of it to prevent him from shooting. I know you have had the experience of seeing Kazuka killed before your eyes, and I don't suppose you would believe anything I say, but if you don't get in touch with us, there is nothing we can do. Be brave. Act like an officer." Hiro, thinking his brother means that last part in code, keeps on walking. "Thanks for the tip, bro. Ha! Part of the mission. Still on." God, this dude truly will not quit. For the next 3 months, he expects a secret agent to come any moment and establish contact with him, but nothing happens. Then he realizes that maybe Lubang has declared itself independent and has joined a federation he has started to think exists between Japan, China, and other Asian states. And if that's true, a Japanese base will soon be built on the island, and all he has to do is wait for that to begin to happen. In late February of 1973, the loudspeaker appeals start yet again. They've been trying to get this guy to fucking give up for almost 30 years now. This one coincides with the search party consisting of primary and middle school kids now, as well as soldiers, to make it seem less threatening. Soldiers who had been at the Futamata school with Hiro. Still, he will not give up. No surrender. 2 months later, the island is quieted down yet again. Toward the end of April, he goes to one of his former huts on the mountain, finds a note his elderly father has left for him now. His father had written, "Not even an echo responds to my call in the summery mountains." In the hut was also a new military uniform and an outfit worn by one of his primary school classmates. In pen, Hiro writes a note back, "Go fuck yourselves, traitors! Goonies! Never say die!" No, what he really wrote was, "Thank you for the 2 uniforms and the large hat which you kindly left for me. In case you were not sure, let me inform you that I am in good health. Hiro Onoda, Army second lieutenant. After a couple more months, my God, the rainy season arrives, and Hiro spends more time in his hut, patching his clothes, waiting for the rain to stop, preparing for battle. He also was thinking a lot about life. Something told him that the Japanese and the Filipinos are cooperating with each other now. If so, should Hiro trust the Filipinos? He decides in the end, after a lot of thought, no, he should not. That fall and winter come and go, and for the 29th time, Hiro celebrates New Year's Day on Lubang Island. February 16th, 1974, Hiro was gathering more bananas around a river. How sick is this guy getting up bananas? When he notices another newer Japanese flag beside the one that had been placed by the search party the year before. And then he heard voices. He quickly took off, but remained close by so he could see who it was. He saw two men carrying guns. He couldn't tell who they were, where they came from. After 3 more days of hiding, he creeps back towards the bananas and spots something large in the river. Looks like a mosquito net, big enough for 2. He quickly assumes that he'd run across some policemen camping, and he would have to take them down. My God. But instead, he spots a man building a fire. And this guy did not have a gun. Hiro calls out to the man. The young Japanese man stands up, turns around. His eyes are round. He wears a t-shirt, dark blue trousers, rubber sandals. He looks surprised. He faces Hiro and salutes. He seems excited and happy now, and he says, I'm Japanese. I'm Japanese. Hiro's first thought is, of course, this is a trap. The local police have gotten a Japanese person to come out here and lure him out. Keeping his rifle ready, Hiro asks the man if he is from the Japanese government. No, he says. Well, then who are you? I'm only a tourist, the man says. Then he asks if he is really Hiro Onoda, and Hiro nods. I know you've had a long, hard time, the man says. The war is over. Won't you come back to Japan with me? His use of polite Japanese expressions tell Hiro that he had grown up in Japan. But it can still be a trap. Hiro says that the war had not ended for him, and if anyone wanted to go back, or him to go back, he would need to have proper orders. This is Hiro's first meeting with a man named Norio Suzuki. So who is this guy? He's an interesting dude. Norio Suzuki was born April of 1949 in China. He studied economics at Hosei University, but dropped out, decided to explore the world. He toured Asia, the Middle East, and Africa before returning to Japan in 1972. In October of 72, he read about Kazuka's death and wanted to see if he could find the last remaining Japanese soldier on Lubang. He expressed his decision this way. He wanted to search for, quote, Lieutenant Onoda, a panda, and the abominable snowman in that order. And he's not kidding. Suzuki was wearing thick woolen socks with rubber sandals. The islanders, or really anyone familiar with the islands, or carrying out a tactical mission, would never have done something like that. And that's a sign to Hiro that this guy actually is who he says he is. He offers Hiro a Marlboro cigarette, and Hiro accepts. He agrees to talk, but he says they'll have to go somewhere else, not out in the open. He has to hide. Before they start to walk off together, Suzuki gives Hiro a novel. Then they go off to a rice field. They start up a slope to the north. As they do, Suzuki says, if I tell the embassy that I met you, they won't believe me. Will you let me take a photograph for proof? And he points to his flash attachment and says, this will make light. It ought to, Hiro says. It's a flash bulb. Oh, you know about flash bulbs? Suzuki seems surprised. This guy fucking knows about anything that's anyone recent. Or recent at all. They go about 50 yards. They sit down. Suzuki tells him the emperor and the people of Japan are worried about him. He describes how Japan had lost the war, but it had now been a peaceful and very prosperous nation for many years. Hiro doesn't believe him. He's just repeating the same propaganda he's been reading about in these fake newspapers for decades, but he does let him take a picture. Then Suzuki says he's not too confident about his photography skills. Could Hiro let him take a picture in the daylight the next day? Hiro does not immediately agree, but they keep talking, and Suzuki finally asks, what will get Hiro to come out of the jungle? Orders from Major Taniguchi, he says, his superior. He says this because he wanted the majors involved in secret warfare, General Tokiyama and Major Takahashi, to stay out of this in case it's a trick. By way of testing Suzuki, Hiro proposes something else. Why doesn't he come to camp with Suzuki? Why didn't he go to camp with Suzuki and stay with him? There we go. Then Suzuki could take his picture in the morning. His real aim is to keep Suzuki under his supervision for the entire night. But to Suzuki, Hiro had just willingly agreed to spend a night and morning with him, and he's elated. That night, Hiro ate canned beans, smoked cigarettes with the kind young man, answered Suzuki's questions about life on the island, how he'd managed to survive for so long. Suzuki tried to give him some nude pictures of some models at one point, but Hiro turns him down. He's like, I've been beating off in the jungle for 30 fucking years. Nothing but a very dirty and calloused hand. I don't need no pictures. In the morning, Suzuki takes his photo, then takes a picture of both of them so that nobody will think he faked the shots. Suzuki even is able to convince Hiro to let Suzuki hold the rifle in the photo, but Hiro still will not go with him and leave the jungle. But he said if he received direct orders, he will go back to Japan willingly. They agree now to set up a message box where Suzuki can leave anything he wants to pass on to Hiro. Then after Suzuki departs and Hiro goes as far away as possible, and then Hiro goes as far away as possible just in case this is a trick and that guy's a spy after all. March 5th, 1974 now. Hiro's hiding out in the mountains when he hears the excited voices of some islanders. He thought maybe Suzuki had come back. 2 weeks had passed, enough time to go back to Japan and then return to Lubang. 2 mornings later, he remembers the message box, decides to go check it. A brand new plastic bag was taped there. The islanders had left. Also, 2 copies of Army orders are inside the bag. One was from the 14th Area Army Headquarters, the other from the Special Squadron. They mentioned that he would be given oral instructions by Major Taniguchi himself as soon as he can make it to the meeting point. Hiro had no idea what these oral orders might be, right? To continue fighting, to go to a new location. Was this possibly a trick? Had the enemy found out how to get to him at last? Hiro doesn't want to let the last 30 years go down the drain because of a trick, and also he has to find out if this is legit. March 9th, 1974, Hiro watches and waits from the bushes. His plan is to wait until dusk, when it was possible to move without being detected, but when you were still able to see people's faces. That way, he'd be able to make sure if the person he was meeting was truly Major Taniguchi. Also meant he'd have a better chance of getting away, if that's what he needed to do. Just after 2 PM, he creeps cautiously out of his hiding place, crosses the river, makes his way through a grove of palms, comes to an area where the islanders cut trees for building. For safety, he camouflaged himself with sticks and dried leaves before proceeding across the small river. My God. It was still only about 4 o'clock now, so he has plenty of time to change into a camouflage of fresh leaves. Does that. Starts up a little hill, gets to higher ground. It's the place where he had talked to Norio Suzuki 2 weeks before, roughly. He was still afraid it might be a trap, though, so he waits and watches, focusing on a yellow tent with a Japanese flag waving above it. After a tense 30 minutes, Hiro decides to come down. The sun is setting. It's their appointed meeting time. It's now or never. Suzuki stands out in an open clearing. Slowly he turns around and he sees, and when he sees Hiro, he comes towards the soldier with his arms outstretched. It's Onoda, he shouts, beside himself with excitement as he rushes to clasp Hiro's hands. Major Taniguchi, it's Onoda. And now in a tent, a shadow moves. Is it really you, Onoda? A voice says. I'll be with you in a moment. Hiro can tell from the voice it is really Major Taniguchi. A few moments later, the major emerges and Hiro barks, Lieutenant Onoda, sir, reporting for orders. He is still after all these years, he is still totally like soldier mode. Major Taniguchi then hands him a package from the Ministry of Health and Welfare. A pack of cigarettes with the chrysanthemum crest of the emperor on them. Hiro accepts, holds it up before him in the way that demonstrated proper respect for the emperor, and awaits his orders. Taniguchi now begins to read. I'll play some traditional Japanese military music behind this. Command from headquarters. 14th Area Army, orders from the Special Squadron, Chief of Staff's headquarters, September 19th, 1900 hours. In accordance with the Imperial Command, the 14th Area Army has ceased all combat activity. In accordance with the military headquarters, Command Number A2003, the Special Squadron in the Chief of Staff's headquarters is relieved of all military duties. Units and individuals under the command of the Special Squadron are to cease military activities and operations immediately and place themselves under the command of the nearest superior officer. When no officer can be found, they are to communicate with the American or Philippine forces and follow their directives. Special Squadron Chief of Staff's headquarters, 14th Area Army, Major Yoshimi Taniguchi. And then the major added, that is all. And after all this time, after Japan flies one of his old commanding officers thousands of miles away 30 years after losing World War II, Hiro still thinks this shit is a fucking trick.
Nothing is over! Nothing! You just don't turn it off!
He doesn't believe it in this moment. He thinks for sure that the major will come up to him and whisper his real orders, what they're going to be. Since Suzuki is still present, he has to be quiet. Maybe Taniguchi is waiting for more privacy. But Major Taniguchi says nothing else. He just slowly folds up the order. And now, Hiro finally begins to realize this is it. There was no trick, no secret message. This was the end. There had been no tricks this entire time. They really had lost the war. They'd lost it 3 decades ago. He had been hiding in the jungle for most of his life for nothing. He'd killed so many villagers who were innocent. He'd ran from his siblings time and time again. And this intense realization is too much for him to handle. And this poor bastard has a bit of a psychotic break. How could he not? Suddenly, Hiro blacks out. His brain simply cannot handle the idea that A, Japan's military, once so superior, had somehow lost, and B, that again, he'd wasted the past 3 decades. He wishes suddenly that he would have died with his fellow soldiers in the initial attack on the island. Hiro now eases off the pack that he had always carried with him, and he sets his gun down on top of it. And in a stupor, he is taken inside the officer's tent. He is asked if he needs to get some rest, some food. He doesn't. That night, he will not sleep at all. He will talk a lot. He will begin giving a report of his reconnaissance and military activity for the past nearly 30 years on Lubang, technically 28 years and 109 days after the end of the war. One hell of a field report. He started in a professional military tone, but as he progressed throughout the story, he will have to stop several times to collect himself. His mind will go blank. He'll go quiet, stare off into the distance. It seems so surreal. Finally, an hour before sunrise, he has finished telling his tale. He still can't sleep. He's not used to a plush cot in a tent. That morning, Taniguchi tells him that President Marcos of the Philippines wants to meet him. So he shouldn't shave off his beard because the president has specifically requested that he come as he was in the mountains. 2 hours later, Hiro's oldest brother, Toshio, arrives. "We finally found you," he exclaims. He gives Hiro a suit, gives him a camera. They walk out onto the road, making sure people are standing on every side of Hiro so that the islanders can't take a shot at him. They fucking hate this guy. Of course they do. He's been shooting at them for 3 decades. He's taken to the mayor's house of the nearest village where he rests for a bit before Hiro takes his brother and others into the mountains to retrieve Kazuka's rifle and his own sword. He marches firmly and proudly as ever as he does so. On March 11th, a formal surrender ceremony is held by the president of the Philippines, Ferdinand Marcos, in Manila. It's filmed, shown on news programs around the world. Marcos grants Onoda a full pardon for any crimes committed while in hiding. In return, Hiro hands over his weapons, including his sword, which he does formally, a formal surrender, given by a World War II soldier, not only after World War II has ended, but after the Korean War has ended, after the Vietnam conflict has ended. Finally, it is time for Hiro Onoda to go home, and he receives a hero's welcome upon his arrival in Japan. The Japanese government offers him a large sum of money in back pay, which he refuses. When money is pressed on him by well-wishers, he donates it to the Yasukuni Shinto shrine. Onoda is reportedly unhappy at receiving this attention and also disappointed in witnessing what he believes to be a withering of traditional Japanese values. He's having just a bit of culture shock. Japan is almost unrecognizable to him now. He soon starts writing his autobiography, No Surrender, My 30-Year War. It becomes a bestseller. It's the main source for our episode today. Then in April of 1975, he follows the example of his elder brother, Tadao, leaves Japan for Brazil, where he becomes a cattle farmer. A cattle farmer who understood the real reason he was there. No one told him anything, but Hiro Onoda, thanks to his intelligent training, knew he fucking needed to raise a secret Imperial Japanese army. Where no one will expect it. The Amazon rainforest. And rumor has it, he is still building that army today.
Nothing is over! Nothing! You just don't turn it off!
No, but he does actually move to Brazil to work with cattle with his brother. He gets married in Brazil in 1976, quickly assumes a leading role in the Jamek colony, a Japanese-Brazilian community in the little central west town of Terrenos. Interestingly, today, Brazil has the most Japanese people and people of Japanese descent of any nation in the world outside of Japan itself, with around 50,000 Japanese living there and another 2 million plus people living there of Japanese descent. The two nations have had a great relationship since the beginning of the 20th century. Onoda also allowed the Brazilian Air Force to conduct training sessions on the land that he now owned, that he bought with his book money. But then after reading about a Japanese teenager who murdered his parents in 1980, Onoda decides he needs to return to Japan, does so in 1984, establishes the Onoda Nature School, an educational camp for young people held in various locations in Japan. Then in 1996, Onoda visits Lubang Island again after his wife Machi arranged a $10,000 donation on his behalf to the local school as a way of apologizing for terrorizing those motherfuckers for 3 decades. A local town's council presented Onoda with a resolution asking him to compensate the families of 7 people whom he allegedly killed. And about 50 relatives of the victims staged a protest against his visit. It's not quite clear from sources if he ended up giving them that money, but I think he did. After 1984, Onoda will spend 3 months of the year in Brazil, the rest in Japan. 20 years later, he'll be awarded the Santos Dumont Merit Medal by the Brazilian Air Force for his generous use of his land for training drills. They give him that medal on December 6th, or that award, December 6th. I guess it is a medal, sorry, December 6th, 2004. Finally, January 16th, 2014, Onoda dies of heart failure, resulting from pneumonia at St. Luke's International Hospital in Tokyo. He was 91. Still ended up having a big full life after all that shit. As for Norio Suzuki, the young man who found him in the jungle, after finding Onoda, Suzuki quickly found a wild panda, and then he claimed to have spotted a Yeti. Not kidding. From a great distance, in July of 1975, hiking in the Himalayas. He was, to put it mildly, an interesting dude. He got married in 1976, did not give up his quest to also find that Yeti, get a closer look at it, really document it, like get a photo, and he will die in November of 1986 in an avalanche while trying to get a picture of a fucking abominable snowman. Seriously. Dude literally died trying to find a Yeti. And you know what? Maybe he died after he found one. Maybe he found that Yeti. The mythical beast then roared an avalanche into existence, so he wouldn't be able to tell anybody. Who knows? I wasn't there, and you weren't either. His remains were discovered a year later and returned to his family. With that, let's get out of this strange timeline.
Good job, soldier. You made it back. Barely.
Hiro Onoda. Such a weird life. It's a wartime story of bravery and courage, certainly, but very misplaced bravery and very misplaced courage. On the island of Lubang, Hiro followed his orders to engage in guerrilla warfare. Holy shit, did he follow those orders. But in 1945, when Japan surrendered, Onoda thought it was a ruse. So he continued living by the principles he had been taught to never, ever surrender.
Nothing is over! Nothing! You just don't turn it off!
To inform such soldiers hidden in the jungle that they could now return home, Japan dropped leaflets from the air, but Onoda still did not believe the news. He was sure it was Allied propaganda. In 1949, one of the other rogue soldiers he was with, Yuichi Akatsu, surrendered to Filipino forces. Onoda thought this could pose even greater danger to him, and he became more cautious. Another one of the soldiers, Shoichi Shimada, is shot dead in 1954. Then Private First Class Kinshichi Kazuka, his final ally, also shot by local police much later, 1972. Each incident further cemented Onoda's idea that the war was still going. If there was no war, why were they being attacked? I mean, probably because you were killing locals, but he didn't make that connection. What's extra crazy is that Hiro never accomplished any of his mission goals that he was given when he first set foot on Lubang in 1944. He never did retake that airfield, never did destroy the pier. Over the years, his life became fully about evading detection and survival, and he did succeed wildly on that front. By the time Norio Suzuki set out to meet him, he was days shy of 52 years old, but in great shape, all things considered. Onoda told Suzuki that he would only surrender after receiving official orders. Suzuki returned to Japan with photos to prove the encounter and to locate Onoda's still surviving commanding officer, Major Yoshimi Taniguchi, for whom the war had long ended. Finally, after receiving his orders, Hiro surrendered. But Onoda struggled to adapt to modern Japan, with all of its westernized values and commerce. A year after his return, he moved to a Japanese community in Brazil, following his brother Tadao. And then he finally passed away in 2014 at the age of 91. Or did he? Maybe he just tricked us. Maybe he wants us to think he's dead, part of his training. Maybe he's back in the jungle somewhere, awaiting his next real orders, ready for Japan to strike when we least expect it and finally win World War II sometime in the next few years.
Nothing is over!
Uh-huh.
Nothing! You just don't turn it off!
Let's head to today's takeaways.
Timesuck Top 5 Takeaways.
Number 1, Hiro Onoda spent nearly 30 years on the small island of Lubang in the Philippines beginning in 1944. Onoda, like many Japanese soldiers, fully embraced the principles promoted by his country's military command, but instead of simply committing suicide when all was lost, which was the conventional military wisdom of the day, he was told to never do that and also never surrender. Number 2, holy cognitive dissonance, Batman. Onoda was given so much information from the outside that contradicted his worldview, and he consistently refused to believe all of it. At first, it was easy to believe that the leaflets and even family photos, doctored family photos, were part of an enemy trick. But then he got a transistor radio, started hearing strange shit about Japan hosting the Olympics, about new trade agreements with the US and Japan, None of this squared up with what he thought, so he invented an elaborate fantasy world in which the economic spheres and military spheres were separate and more in order to continue to believe he needed to stay focused on his mission, to not believe he'd been wasting his life in the jungle for years. Number 3, Hiro was discovered by a young explorer named Norio Suzuki, who seemed to want to find the soldier, well, simply because he was a strange dude who wanted to see some strange shit. And he accomplished what multiple search parties were unable to do previously. Search parties that had been full of members of the soldiers' families, had notable Japanese media figures in them, some like a reporter and stuff. Suzuki would ultimately arrange for Hiro to be discharged, and Hiro was finally on his way home. Number 4, Hiro's story, though accepted as a thrilling tale by the Japanese public who longed for a legitimate war hero, not without its stains. He did murder potentially 30 islanders outside of wartime. Does that make him a mass murderer? Was he responsible for those crimes? Well, the authorities in both the Philippines and Japan thought he was not. Just a huge and obviously very tragic misunderstanding. And number 5, new info, Hiroo Onoda was not the last guy to keep fighting for the glory of Imperial Japan. That would be unless rumors of other even longer holdouts are true. Taro Nakamura, born in Taiwan, October 8th, 1919. He enlisted in the Japanese army in November of 1943 and then was stationed on the island of Morotai in what is now Indonesia. And the Allies conquered most of the 900-plus square mile island in September of 1944. Small groups of fighters hiding there would finally all surrender a year later in September of 1945. Well, almost all of them. Taro Nakamura and a small group of other Japanese soldiers hid in the jungle awaiting further instructions from their commanders until 1956. That year, Taro split away from the others and went solo. He built a little hut, fenced in a 66 by 98-foot little yard of sorts, and stayed there for 18 more years. A pilot flying over the island accidentally discovered his hut in mid-1974, and that December, Indonesian soldiers captured him, and then he was sent back to Taiwan, where sadly he was not welcomed since he had fought for the Japanese, and they did not have goodwill towards the Japanese. He died 5 years later after living as a hermit of lung cancer. Bummer of a story. He had been in the jungle for 29 years and 107 days after Japan surrendered. Another guy, Shouichi Yokoi, hid in the jungles of Guam after the war ended for 26 years and 151 days. Insanely, Shouichi figured out the war had ended in 1952, but kept hiding until 1972. So another 20 years, because he was embarrassed. He said, "We Japanese soldiers were told to prefer death to the disgrace of getting captured alive." But he didn't want to kill himself, so he just kept hiding. And rumors of other holdouts would continue for decades. In May of 2005, some 60 years after the war ended, 2 elderly men emerged from a jungle in the Philippines claiming to be Japanese World War II soldiers. And then the ensuing media attention scared them back into the jungle before Japanese officials could interview them, and they disappeared forever. Were they who they said they were? Did some guys spend the rest of their lives, perhaps very long lives, out in the jungles of the South Pacific, awaiting further instructions from their military superiors?
Nothing is over! Nothing! You just don't turn it off!
Timesuck Top 5 Takeaways.
Never surrender. The World War II soldier who fought until 1974 has been sucked. Thank you to the Bad Magic Productions team for all their help in making Timesuck. Thanks to Queen of Bad Magic, Lindsay Cummins. Thanks as well to Logan Keith, helping to publish this episode and designing merch for the store at badmagicproductions.com. Thanks to Sophie Evans for her research on this one. Also, thanks to the All Seen Eyes moderating the Cult of the Curious private Facebook page, the Mod Squad, making sure Discord keeps running smooth, and everyone over on the Timesuck subreddit and Bad Magic subreddit. And now let's head on over to this week's Timesucker updates. I got some very interesting ones this week.
Updates? Get your Timesucker updates.
Before 2 more serious messages, start off with something silly. Shitty Sack Ty, you'll understand why he didn't include his last name, wrote in with the subject line of, "You made me shit my pants." I'm blaming this one on you, you son of a bitch, he writes. "Howdy, Dan. My name is Ty, longtime listener, first-time victim. I listen to your podcast on my way to, from, and while at work. I'm a manager of a rock quarry." That's cool. Commute about half an hour daily. As I was driving in yesterday, listening to episode 436 on the history of shit, I was about 10 minutes away when it hit me. I had to shit. I unlocked the gate. I was in the process of haul-assing up the hill in my pickup. Had to pause the episode because I couldn't bear to hear you say one more word about big, massive turds plaguing London. I parked my truck, did the clenched ass, straight-legged power walk / scurry. Oh, I know it so well. To my one and only hope, the Porta-John. As I approached the door, I decided to unbutton my pants, save some time. Bad move. As I did this, I simultaneously opened the door, and I felt a huge relief followed by a wave of dread and fear. I just shit my pants. After shedding them off, I used dude wipes to clean up and do the pantless walk of shame back to my truck, where I luckily had a pair of sweatpants. And rather than losing money by returning home to change, I went the entire day of dealing with customers and operating heavy equipment while going commando in gray sweats. And I finished the episode out of spite while living in shame. Thank you for the last, big guy. I'm sure one day I'll forgive you. Love the show. 3 to 5 stars. Don't change a thing. Yours truly, the quarry manager that couldn't go poo-poo in the potty like a big boy. Ty. Ty, damn it. I laughed out loud so hard when I first read that. Shitting yourself while listening to an episode about shit. How about that? I've been there with the shitting yourself. I shit myself on the streets of Portland, Oregon about 5-6 years ago after thinking that I could skip an open Starbucks bathroom and just wait till my hotel room. Nope, didn't make it. Not quite. Power walk to the lobby as shit began to literally seep through my gym shorts, only to get into an elevator for a very uncomfortable ride because I was not alone. I could smell it, so I know they could too. Not my finest moments. Now for something a lot more serious. Super sucker Jackie sent in a message with the subject line of a very scared scientist, and it hit me hard. And she wrote, "Hey, Suckmaster, I'm writing in because, I don't know. I guess I need some advice or someone to tell me it's going to be okay. I've written in before about goofy stuff. I've always loved you, Timesuck, the whole Bad Magic universe. And as much as I wish so badly to escape here like I used to, I'm really struggling. I'm currently a PhD student in Texas, studying immunology and vector-borne disease transmission, specifically Lyme disease, in search for a vaccine, and I am scared. I walked into my office on Monday to find out that funds for my research have been frozen. Luckily, my boss is an amazing scientist, and we have other funds to keep us afloat for now. Then I was told that my fellowship might be taken away. Not because I've done anything wrong or broken my contract, but because it is associated with DEI. When I was admitted into the PhD program, I was encouraged by my boss to apply for a diversity fellowship through my university. At first, I felt like I didn't meet the requirements, despite being a woman in a male field. But my boss looked at me and said, anyone who has survived what you have to get here is diverse. You fought to live. You fought harder to be here. That is diversity. Long story short-ish, my parents struggled often with addictions to a variety of things like heroin and alcohol. They split when I was really little, but that only left me in a position to be responsible for my siblings. And eventually, as my mom's addiction grew worse, I was responsible for her as well. Soon, all of my siblings left for various reasons, and it was suddenly just me and my mom. And I felt like if I left, I would be condemning her to death because I wouldn't be here to save her. When I was 14, she was arrested for drugs with me in the car at gunpoint. She had been arrested before, and I wouldn't just spend that time hopping couches until she came back. So I thought then that she would get out like before. And when my dad demanded I come live with him, I refused. I didn't know any better. My 14-year-old brain said, I have friends, school, a boyfriend, etc. I didn't want to go. My father's solution was to tell me I was dead to him now. That I would, quote, just be another addict. And then he left. Just like that. After a while of couch hopping, my grandparents took me in. They had just adopted my niece and nephew, the Littles, 4 months and 5 years respectively, and had no room. But they let me stay on the couch and use half my niece's closet. All I had at the time was a lot of anger, no privacy, no bed, my school books, solid combo, honestly. I made a decision then that the way to save myself was to get out. If I wanted to save the Littles, I had to pave a way for them. So I buckled down, decided I was going to get myself into college. No one in my family, especially the women, had ever finished high school before, let alone gone to college. So the odds were slim, but I wanted it so desperately. It wasn't easy. After a month in prison, we found out my mom was pregnant with my youngest brother, the third Little, to complete the pack. And I soon found myself responsible for him as well. Then in 2016, my grandma, who had been my rock throughout all of this, suddenly died of a heart attack while I was at school. I came home to ambulances in the driveway, screamed in the hospital for her as she passed on. But I had the Littles, and I had always been told while helping raise them, quote, if they see you afraid, they'll be afraid. So I sucked it up, tried to keep everything together for them. I had to keep moving or risk taking them down with me. Eventually, it worked out. I finished high school, got into a top university with a scholarship in a program for biomedical sciences focused on human medicine. I finished college after lots of other psychotic shit happening. More death, suicide in the family, health problems, car accident that affected my mobility, etc. And I applied to the PhD program, which brings me to now. I have always loved science, especially life sciences. And I've always believed that research was the foundation that built the modern world. Yeah, because that's fucking true. Without curiosity and innovation and research, none of the world we know would exist. I've always believed that science overwhelmingly does more good than harm. Because it does, yep. And I was so excited to be part of this field. Now, after 4.5 years, I'm standing on the brink of losing everything I've worked for because of misinformation and conspiracy theories. I have my own Instagram channel that I use for science education and activism. I have been told that I am the enemy, that I am perpetuating harm. I'm helping design weapons meant to hurt people in the form of medicine. I've had people wish me harm or wish me dead. And honestly, none of that bothered me too much. I have a very thick skin. But I truly never thought that my love for science would turn me into an enemy. I never thought I would have to worry about if this field would continue to thrive, because infectious diseases are boundless, always present, and often dangerous. And I thought that even with the people who believed the conspiracies, there were more out there who didn't. But now, I don't think that's true anymore. I'm losing hope, something I have never lacked before. The demonization of experts is damaging our world, it fucking sure is, and putting everyone at risk. Yep. I fought so hard for this. Only 3% of first-generation students make it into graduate programs, and even less than that will finish. I clawed my way here. I gave up and sacrificed so much to be here. I don't know what to do. I do this job because I love science, and also because I believe that we can help. I believe that research is what advances humanity. But I'm so tired of being told that I'm a brainwashed demon sent here to hurt people because some idiots with no scientific background have decided that none of this matters. Yep, exactly. And no scientific background is the key there. Fucking armchair quarterbacks are the worst kind. I don't know what I'll do without this. If they remove my fellowship, I could lose my ability to go to school. My boss would happily fund me, but it wouldn't be possible if we can't even access the funds we worked so hard to secure in the first place. I'm not the person to go down without a fight. I'm not easily swayed, but this is so far outside of my control. I feel like I'm trying to catch sand with a strainer and watching all of it slip away. I've tried to encourage my friends, coworkers, and students to keep working, to keep moving. Even if these fuckheads get rid of our field, the diseases won't stop, so we can't either. But what's the point? So we can work our asses off, put in 80 to 100 hours a week for extremely low pay, only be told that we're lying or trying to deceive people, that we're dangerous and untrustworthy? I don't have a reason for writing this. I suppose I just want someone to say it's going to be okay and that things will get better, because right now I see no light at the end and I'm very much drowning in the dark. I'm so sorry for the long email. Totally get it if you disregard it. I think I just needed to bitch and have a little pity party for a second so I can carry on being a bad bitch. Hopefully someday I'll still have the chance to sign off as doctor in these emails. Sincerely, your always loyal timesucker and creep, Jackie B. Fucking Jackie. It hurt my heart, man, to read this. Couple things first. You are, as you know, a bad bitch. You're a fucking boss bitch. And after all of the shit that you've been through, this current cultural bullshit, it is not going to stop you. This will not define you. We live in a nation right now full of a lot of very scared people, scared in many different ways. And you know what? And rightfully scared, not even trying to pick on them. As I have preached so many times here before, the wealth gap continues to grow. Inflation is making decent food a luxury for too many. Working 2 jobs is not enough for too many to be able to ever buy a house or send their kids to school. And it keeps getting worse, and that is scary. And then we have wildly manipulative politicians weaponizing this fear and adding to it with unfounded conspiracy theories, sowing discord, confusion by turning the population against the educated, against scientists. And why would they do that? Well, because they're soulless, greedy, narcissistic sociopaths, some of them, and because they're not dumb. They know that fear breeds ignorance, and an ignorant population is an easily controllable population. Keep people distracted with vapid, simple rally slogans. Keep preaching hate and division. Keep telling the poor and the working class that you're fighting for them, when in reality, you're going to feed them to the fucking rich. And you, Jackie, are caught in the crossfire. But while the most ignorant voices tend to be the loudest, they're not the only voices. There are still so many who value, myself and many others included, who believe in science and logic and education as the foundation of a worthwhile society. If you lose your fellowship, you will find another way, because you're a fucking fighter. And if more and more people in this country decide that they know more than the specialists who have literally dedicated their lives to accurately understanding an area of expertise, because these people have just read some bullshit on Facebook and gotten some attaboys, hell yeah, from some other fucking fools who read some shit on Facebook, then you know what? Look into moving overseas. Get funding somewhere else, right? This isn't the only country that needs science. The world needs it. Find other countries that do value science. And maybe, I don't know, maybe we can bring that medicine back here. What you do is so important. Modern medicine has improved our lives immensely, and it improves the lives of everybody, regardless of what political alliance belief they have, right? It will continue to make lives better for everyone on this planet. To quote The Handmaid's Tale, don't let the bastards grind you down. We do need people like you. And the people demonizing you, they need you the most, ironically. To quote Jesus of Nazareth, Luke 23:34 to be specific, I know I'm not religious, but I also know that there's a lot of wisdom in religious texts. They know not what they do. They really fucking don't. They're just scared. And fear unchecked tends to lead to anger, to lashing out. I love you, Jackie. You will persevere. And now for a message from the All-Seeing Eyes, who moderate the Cult of the Curious 3 out of 5 stars private Facebook page. They collectively wrote the following statement to explain some, I guess for me to share with you why they make the decisions they do and to address some anger in the group. It's a weird fucking time right now. My fellow Dans, happy 2025. With the new year brings new change. With Zuckerfuck changing things up, we've decided to change things as well. In the past, we've had 2 groups shut down, so we had to be more strict. We don't know how things are going to go going forward, so we are going to make some changes. If Zuckerfuck changes his rules, we will adjust accordingly. Number 1, starting now, we will turn on post approval. This is for a few reasons. It'll help cut down on duplicate and non-Timesuck related posts. There are only so many times you can see the same bicycle and banana post before you snap. Oh, sorry about that. Or trying to figure out how the post is related to Timesuck. We are unpaid volunteers. Yeah, that's important. Unpaid volunteers with our own busy personal lives, just trying to make this group fun and supportive. It may be funny, and you may want to share it with the cult, but there are other subgroups and pages for that. If your post doesn't get approved, don't get butthurt. We are not singling you out. Nobody cares enough to block your posts, except you, Brad Baker. Do better. We will let you know why your post was rejected. Please don't take it personally. Number 2, we are changing rule number 9 from be respectful to people's political beliefs to just no politics and religion talk. We know Dan talks about these topics often, but it appears as though we can no longer have productive and polite conversation without it devolving into name-calling and personal attacks. There was a time once when we didn't discuss politics and religion in polite society. Maybe it's time we go back to it. Perhaps some brave soul can make a subgroup for those topics. 3, we are restricting GoFundMe posts from this group. We understand that you or a relative may have developed pneumono ultra microscopic volcanoiosis, and it sucks, but we have the Cult of the Generous group for that. You never know who's doing the asking for help, and then it's safer to restrict the stuff to a smaller subgroup than to the big main group, because the bigger the group, the more likely it is to attract scammers. Even though 99.99% of you are amazing meat sacks, this is the internet. There most certainly is a Reverend Dr. Nigerian Prince lurking amongst our flock, just looking to take advantage of our kindness. Same goes for your contests that you're in. Well, we'll help, but we got to keep this page clear of clutter. We thank you all for helping to make this community the amazing cult it has grown to be. P.S. We also wanted to use this opportunity to make Dan attempt to pronounce pneumono ultra microscopic silicovolcanosis again. It's been a while. I don't even remember that word before I fucking blocked it out. Thank you, All-Seeing Eyes. So that's what they wrote. So good. Yes, let's keep the Cult of the Curious group fun. And anyone who thinks, and I understand why you would, that it's so hypocritical for me to talk about religion and politics here, but then have, posts like that blocked in the group, I can explain the difference. When I share my thoughts here, they're not directed at any one of you specifically. I'm never like, hey, Hank Greenberg, listen up, motherfucker. What you think is dumb. It's one thing to pontificate on a podcast about things generally. It is another to make it personal. While I have shared polarizing opinions here about, say religion, what I don't do is approach one of my many religious friends or relatives out of nowhere and be like, hey, Megan, let me give you a piece of my mind right now. Fuck what you believe. No, I don't share my opinions at a family get-together or went out to dinner with friends unless I'm specifically asked about that subject. I don't randomly personally attack so-and-so's beliefs. And that's what's been going on in the Cult of the Curious. And it's not productive. And the rest of the world is doing so fucking much of that right now. Oh my God. This group should be a refuge from that. If you really want to kick off a conversation with somebody, then DM them. You don't have to post it for everyone to see in a group. I would say think of the group like a party, right? There are certain things you can say at a party and not be a dick in front of everybody. And then there are other things, more intense things, that once you are having a smoke with somebody outside the party and you're talking one-on-one and feeling it out, and then you see how the conversation goes away from the ears of the rest of the party. And if you think, I don't do that, no, I say the same shit wherever I am in front of whoever and I don't give a fuck, well then maybe stay out of the group altogether because you're an asshole and nobody likes you. Shit's crazy right now. I'm trying to bite my tongue more often, which is hard for me because I just don't want to add to the divisiveness and the discord. And I know sometimes I will still be interpreted that way because fucking everything is fucking politicized now. If you try to defend science, people are like, hey, I'm sick of being attacked. Well, if you can't handle me standing up for science, just fuck right off. But please try and be nice in this group to your fellow cult members. If you want to tell them to fuck off, all right, maybe DM them again, make it a private conversation, but please don't. There's so many other places, where that's being done. Go to YouTube. I don't know. Go to almost any other Facebook group and just, throw your angst there. So that's it. We're trying to fucking keep this ship from sinking. Hail Nimrod and be nice to each other.
Thanks, time suckers. I needed that.
We all did.
Well, thank you for listening to another Bad Magic Productions podcast. Scared to Death, Timesuck each week. Short sex. Short sex? Short sex. I like that. I enjoy short sex. Short Sucks and Nightmare Fuel on the Timesuck and Scared to Death podcast feeds twice a month. Careful in the jungle this week. You just don't know who's still out there. Still fighting for the glory of Imperial Japan. And keep on sucking.
Bad Magic Productions.
And now, how about one more bit of silliness from my favorite scene from Dumb and Dumber, which I already had you listen to a little tiny piece of. I just hope, if you're going through it right now, I hope that at the very least, your pets still have their heads on them.
Where's the booze?
I got robbed by a sweet old lady on a motorized cart. I didn't even see it coming. Oh, Harry. No. Harry. No. Come on, Harry.
Yeah, Daniel's Jim Carrey so good.
It's worse, Lloyd. My parakeet Petey. He's dead.
Oh, man, I'm sorry, Harry. What happened?
His head fell off.
His head fell off.
So stupid.
Yeah, he was pretty old.
Then we gotta hear this part again.
Oh, that's it. I've had it with this dump. We got no food. We got no jobs. Our pets' heads are falling off.
We got no food. We got no jobs. Our pets' heads are falling off. One of the best movie lines maybe of all time. Take care, everybody.